You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
The hypocrites were there, their faces waxed with grief. George W. Bush, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama and Joe Biden, for whom the death toll on 9/11 would represent a quiet Tuesday afternoon. We'll be looking at the anniversary of the mass terrorist atrocity on 9/11. We'll be asking, who knew what and when did they know it? And why did they make such a mess of the response to it? And with rumours of a reshuffle in the British government, we'll be frequently casting our eyes in the direction of the nightmare on Downing Street that runs the United Kingdom. And they've got China on their mind, don't they? No sooner had they finished the war in Afghanistan, the Wall Street Journal posited the possibility that they may have to go to war with China. And Donald Trump is back. Anyone who doubted that didn't see him at the boxing last night. 4 more years, they were chanting, thousands of them. And instead of standing with the hypocrites in New York, Donald Trump stood amongst hundreds of firefighters, the real heroes of 9/11. He wrote in the logbook, "I love you all," signed Donald J. Trump. I'm telling you, Donald Trump is back because his box office and Joe Biden cuts a pitiful sight. We'll be looking at his transcripts released just in the last few days, partially redacted, of course. It's the mother of all talk shows. Fasten your
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway.
This is Radio Sputnik.
A packed show tonight, so much going on, and some of it unscripted, like the Chief Whip arriving in Downing Street just before we came on air, and the head of Conservative Party Communications. Something's in the air, and unless we're very lucky, it isn't Boris Johnson's resignation. It's much more likely that it's going to be a night of the long knives in Downing Street. A night of the long knives, and we can easily speculate as to who might be for the chop. An indicator was the release of highly damaging charges against the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, just this afternoon. You may recall that Theresa May sacked her from her previous job because of unauthorised dealings in defiance, in breach of the ministerial code. Turns out, allegedly, she's been doing the same thing again. For a donor, of course, and for British Airways. And the Foreign Secretary, Dominic Raab, who was on a deck chair as Kabul fell, who couldn't be reached on the phone, who delegated to junior officials jobs that should have been done by himself, leaving in the low hundreds of British nationals behind in the tender hands of the Taliban. He might be for the chop too. I got a bet on this week for the next Prime Minister, and I got 50-1 for her. I'll tell you later who she is. But, of course, the big story of the week was the 20th anniversary of the mass murder on 9/11, 2001. It was murder most foul. Somebody in a conspiracy, premeditated, deliberately set out to murder innocents. As I said at the time, to kill innocent people for the crimes of guilty people is a sin in any religion, a crime in any jurisdiction. And that's what happened. Almost 3,000 innocent people were massacred live on television on 9/11/2001. Whoever ordered it, whoever carried it out, whoever collaborated with it, whoever covered up what happened, committed a very great sin and a very great crime. I have followed the story, of course, from the start. I saw the second aeroplane hit the Twin Towers live as it happened on television. I had started to watch after the first aeroplane with its fins sticking out of the building, when it was just possible, though unlikely, that some freak aviation accident had occurred. As I was watching, the second aeroplane flew directly at the Twin Towers and slammed into it. And before the building began to crumble, the presses were rolling in London at The Guardian, in the days that I could write for The Guardian, with a piece by me, which began, remember, the 11th of September. And I made it clear then, as I do tonight, to the disappointment of many, that I was in no doubt then and am in no doubt now that the motivation, the inspiration for this act of mass murder emanated from the ranks of Al-Qaeda, from Osama bin Laden, and people with the mindset that he had already fully developed by the time of this great crime. That doesn't mean that nobody else is involved in the conspiracy. I'm perfectly persuaded that there was a conspiracy, and that was before the release, partial release, of heavily redacted papers by President Biden just this week, which demonstrate beyond contradiction that high officials in the Saudi Arabian regime were in close and continuing contact with some of the hijackers of the airplanes on 9/11. That at least one of the high-ranking intelligence service officers of the Saudi Arabian regime passed money, tasked his inferiors in his apparatus to work closely with these, and I quote, very significant individuals, unquote, who were there in the United States to do, quote, important work, unquote. We now know what that important work was. So the first question that arises, if high officials within the regime of the dictatorship of Saudi Arabia were known at the time as a result of FBI investigations to have been involved in a conspiracy with people who later hijacked airplanes and flew them into American public buildings, killing thousands of people, why was the response not to target Saudi Arabia, but to target Afghanistan and then Iraq instead? Afghanistan had nothing to do directly with the events of 9/11, but has now endured 20 years of Calvary, crucifixion, because they had on their territory the aforementioned bin Laden and the aforementioned Al-Qaeda. Of course, they were there in Afghanistan because they had been sent there by the United States government in the 1980s, supported by the United Kingdom government, the Egyptian government, the Turkish government, and many other friendly NATO members across the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. They had been sent there, given money, given weapons, and given endless propaganda coverage by the very same Western media that was waxing so lyrically on the 20th anniversary yesterday. Particularly for older viewers and listeners, ITV News, ITN, News at 10, that was the house journal of what they called in the 1980s the Mujahideen, the fathers, the uncles, the older brothers of today's Taliban, of today's Al-Qaeda. They were sent there on the morally bankrupt principle that my enemy's enemy is my friend. Even though your enemy's enemy might be worse than your enemy, even though in building up your enemy's enemy, you are constructing a Frankenstein monster that will immediately, on construction, move beyond your control. Or perhaps not, always beyond your control. So Afghanistan was punished twice. These Islamist head-chopping cutthroats were sent fully armed and financed by the West and its satrapies in the Gulf to bleed the supporters of the government, the only government there has ever been in Afghanistan, the organized for girls and young women to go to schools and universities, that vaccinated the whole population of Afghanistan for the one and only time against horrific diseases that for millennia had cut them down. A government which brought into common ownership the feudal lands on which the Afghans had worked for millennia as serfs and slaves. A government that tried to drag Afghanistan into the modern era. And as I said to Margaret Thatcher on the eve of the fall of Kabul, to the fathers of the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, you have opened the gates for the barbarians, and a long dark night will now descend upon the people of Afghanistan. And so, of course, it did. The Afghans were punished twice. The Iraqis were murdered in their hundreds of thousands, after hundreds of thousands of them had already been murdered by the cruel, eviscerating sanctions regime that was killing Iraqi children before those children even knew that they were Iraqis, but were being killed for no other reason than that they were Iraqis. That's why I cannot take seriously the fake grief of the commentators and of the politicians who did so much to drag the world into this pit, this disaster that we are still in and will be in throughout the lifetime of the youngest person watching and listening to this show tonight. Afghanistan and Iraq were followed by Libya, followed by Syria, followed by Yemen. The thirst for war of these blood-sucking masters of war, masters, I said, though I could have said a word that sounds quite like it. These masters of war are not finished yet. As I said earlier, no sooner had the war in Afghanistan come, though perhaps only temporarily, to an end, the Wall Street Journal was openly positing the question that the United States may be forced. They're always forced. They don't want to do it. It's Johnny Foreigner that makes them do all these things, to go to war with China. I'm here to tell you that any war with China will be the last war. It'll be the Third World War, but it'll be the last World War. It'll be the last war. It'll be the last anything in the history of the human race. Because unlike Iraq, unlike Afghanistan, unlike many of the places attacked by NATO over these last 20 years, China is well able and absolutely willing to fight back with everything that she possesses. And she possesses much. We'll be talking about the anti-China propaganda, which has reached fever pitch in the United States, with Great Britain not all that far behind, and for reasons which are exceedingly difficult to discern. We'll be talking about Prince Andrew. You know, when you're reduced to saying the papers weren't served on you properly in accordance with the law, it doesn't do much for your reputation when you're being accused of serious sexual offences. And when you've gone to Balmoral Castle to hide in the skirts of your mother, your 94-year-old mother, the sovereign of Great Britain, in order to avoid the bailiffs, it's not a good look, Andrew. I really hope, at least for your mother's sake, you're going to do better in the court in New York this very morning. Next day, Monday, is the witching hour for Prince Andrew, the man who doesn't sweat. And we'll be talking, of course, about the remarkable scenes last night with Donald Trump. He was paid a very large sum of money to be a commentator at the big fight last night. There were thousands of people in the auditorium, and they couldn't get enough of Donald Trump. They were chanting 4 more years. They were roaring every sight of him, every sound of him. The working class, blue-collar America that go to these boxing events wants Trump. As did the firefighters in New York, it looked to me, as they posed in their hundreds around Trump, who didn't go and stand with the phonies at the memorial. He wasn't going to stand beside these hypocrites. He's a hypocrite in his own right and in a different league from the others. And he stood there amongst all these firefighters who had plunged into the fire, losing 400 firefighters almost, who perished as they plunged into the fire in the Twin Towers on 9/11, whilst George Bush was cowering wherever he cowered on the day that all this unfolded. My last point is this: the rehabilitation by liberals in the United States, closely followed by their hypocrite echo chamber here in Britain, of George W. Bush, literally turns my stomach. This imbecilic war criminal has been repackaged, varnished, and put out there as some kind of American hero. The man who introduced the Patriot Act, the man who made Guantanamo famous, the man who tortured people in Abu Ghraib, the man who kidnapped people and renditioned them all over the world to black prisons to be tortured, the man who led the invasion and occupation of Iraq, which has killed 1 million people and counting, spawning ISIS along the way. The man that began this nightmare which has lasted virtually the entirety of this century so far, is now packaged by The Guardian, by the BBC, by the New York Times, by the Washington Post, by their online progeny as some kind of unifying figure, some kind of hero. We'll be talking about all of this over the next 2 hours and 39 minutes. But let me give you my first question. In this week, in 1933, scientist Leo Szilard was stuck at a red light in Southampton Row, Bloomsbury, in London, when he had his great idea. What was it? A, the nuclear chain reaction. B, the hovercraft. C, the helicopter. Answer after this.
Radio Sputnik.
Time, weather, and...
Now, don't forget, you can download the podcast of this program, a finely edited highlights version of this 3-hour epic. It's being listened to now all around the world. Huge numbers are downloading the, as it were, compact version of the show. Of course, in the UK and the US, but listen to these countries that downloaded it last week: Japan, India, Denmark, Saudi Arabia, Korea, Switzerland, UAE, and Hong Kong in China. All of those had significant audiences of last week's show. Search Moats, M-O-A-T-S, on the app where you get your podcast from.
Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Well, the answer to the question, somewhat to my surprise, is nuclear chain reaction. 1933, sitting at a red light in Southampton Row, Bloomsbury. It puts new light on the fertility of the intellectuals around Bloomsbury. The nuclear chain reaction came to its author, its creator, I suppose, in 1933. Now, here's the first poll of the evening. Will Prince Andrew testify in the US courts tomorrow? A, yes. B, no. C, strings will be pulled. You can vote on my Twitter feed, on my YouTube channel, and on my Telegram. And I think the votes are pouring in. Now, let me tell you about the podcast. Last week was another fantastic week for us. Another listener record broken. Moats, the podcast, had its daily listener record broken once again this week and is now listened to in 81 countries, including Indonesia. My missus will be very happy to know that. Senegal and Tanzania. So remember to subscribe so you never miss an episode, and leave us, if you will, a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. If you're a Spotify user, please follow us and share with your friends so more people can enjoy Moats, the podcast. Now, I mentioned at some length China in my introduction. I did so last week also. And literally millions of viewers. China is a big place. Millions of people watched the clips in 24 hours, watched the clips of what I said with a collar on China last week. On one platform, Chinese Twitter, Weibo it's called, 1.6 million people watched that clip in 10 hours. God knows how many it is now. One of the people that watched it was a man that I had been remiss in not following until now. He is a truly fantastic voice. Defending China, yes, but defending the rest of the world from the consequences, which could be fatal, of this constant ramping up of war fever with China. His name is Daniel Dumbrill. He has massively impressed me. I think he's going to impress you. And he joins me. Now he's an independent, China-based political commentator and YouTuber. Daniel, thank you very much indeed for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. And I take my hat off to your work, which had escaped my attention until this week, but I'm now an expert on Daniel Dumbrill. But before we talk about you, let's talk about China. Is it just jealousy of China's success that accounts for the absolutely poisonous public print and public broadcasting atmosphere on all things to do with China? Or is it something else?
Well, I think that, and first of all, thanks for having me on your show. I'm a very big fan of what you do as well. I think jealousy plays a role in it, in getting everybody on board to kind of speak out against China. But I think underneath it all, there's more important things going on. I mean, there's a global order, and there's a certain hegemony that's in place now that needs to be preserved. China's making a lot of inroads into global South countries with their Belt and Road Initiative and things like that. And so now all of a sudden, these countries have two options to deal to work with. They don't just have one exploitative option under what a lot of people call IMF fundamentalism. Now they have two choices, and they're increasingly choosing to work with China. So that is going to displace a lot of the current world order. That's going to, displace a lot of the current corporate structures in our world as well. So I think there's a pretty big vested interest in kind of smacking China back down. Obviously, there's the currency issue as well. The U.S. has weaponized their U.S. dollar for so long that they've just basically made an incentive for a lot of people to come up with an alternative. And I think some people might be afraid that China finally took that opportunity, and they're opening up their renminbi a little bit more, and they also have their digital renminbi, blockchain-based renminbi coming out as well. And things don't usually work out too well for people that challenge the U.S. dollar hegemony. So I think there's a lot of different things at play, but certainly on the ground level, getting people hyped up about saying, yes, we need to smack China back down, tapping into, especially in America, the culture of we're number one, definitely helps to get people on board and kind of sell this idea to more people.
Daniel, the way I've put it in the past is that there's a kind of hellish orchestra, and the conductor brings different parts of the orchestra in this hellish chorus against China, according to taste or news, developments and so on. They range from, and there are others, from Tibet, the Falun Gong, the COVID vaccine, Hong Kong, Taiwan, the origin of COVID, I meant to say, China's incredible success in the Olympic Games, the Paralympic Games. How are they doing it? Is it the old East German story? Are the athletes doped? And there's innumerable causes. And of course, I omitted perhaps the most recent and most salient, the issue of Muslims in the Xinjiang province of China, the so-called Uyghur question, a tribunal for which has been set up and has already given a date for its verdict, which gives you some clue as to what the verdict might be. There's so many different issues. All of these issues, of course, may have some element worth debating, worth arguing. I'm not, and neither are you, a paid mouthpiece for China, but all of them are being cynically used, aren't they?
The reason I want to speak out against this is it definitely is ramping up, and it looks like they're trying to manufacture consent for something. I think for sure the Xinjiang narrative is probably one of the most absurd items, as you mentioned. And if you don't mind, I'd like to kind of zoom out and kind of explain what we're expected to believe, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So we are now expected to believe a narrative that we have to keep in mind is overwhelmingly funded by China's rival, the U.S. And they've been caught lying over and over again to attack their targets and or to accomplish their geopolitical goals throughout history. And so they're now sponsoring and expecting us to believe a story about genocide going on in Xinjiang with no mass exodus or refugee crisis. And it's a story supported by a handful of so-called concentration camp escapees who left China legally on their passports through China exit immigration. And the most famous being somebody named Tersine Ziawadin, who's been carted around in U.S. government panels like it's Naira 2.0 on a Netflix special, and who apparently had her passport renewed while she was under arrest, which is, of course, impossible. And when that hole was discovered, 4,000 people had signed a petition to get the BBC to answer as to why they uncritically pushed her story, and they refused to respond. Then when CNN republished her story, they deliberately blurred out only her passport renewal date when they put it up on screen. So obviously to cover up that gaping hole in her story rather than to address it. Now, there have been people that were leaving Xinjiang illegally through Southeast Asia. They make their way into Malaysia, then they fly to Turkey and they transfer over to Syria. And the West knows these people exist. But despite trying to convince everyone that they're escaping persecution, they don't offer them refuge. And the reason is really simple. It's because they know that they really do belong to a group of radicalized people that China says exists, but they're on their way to carry out jihad fighting alongside al-Qaeda, with many of their kids training in ISIS-built camps. And this is verifiable, by the way. There's plenty of footage of it. And they're ultimately going there to help destabilize Syria and fight against what the West considers to be a common overlapping enemy. Now, this is important. Had they been carrying out jihad in the West, killing people like they're killing in Syria and displacing people like they are with the Kurds, suddenly the whole story wouldn't be about China, these measures that China's taking. It would be a story of China being an exporter of terrorism, not doing enough to stop it. But since that's not happening, they'll turn a blind eye to it, but they'll also keep their distance from these escapees because they've learned the lesson the last time around when they've cozied up too closely with Salafist jihadists willing to fight in Libya after seeing them shift to carrying out jihad in the West when they were finished with Gaddafi. So that's kind of a high-level view of what we've got on the table before drilling into any specifics and to understand why people's spidey senses should have kind of already been tingling by now.
Quite. There's also, of course, amongst the many different parts of this orchestra, the chorus around Taiwan. Now, I pointed out to someone today something which is not widely known in our public opinion here, that Taiwan itself does not consider itself to be a separate country or its people a separate people. The Constitution of Taiwan describes itself as a part of China and its people as Chinese people. The false dichotomy that is being offered us is that here's this gallant, plucky little Taiwan, which is being menaced by a different country, China, and to whose aid we need to come. And if there's going to be an exchange of fire between NATO and its Quad allies and China, it's going to be there over Taiwan, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of different flashpoints. So Taiwan definitely is one of those possible flashpoints. If something is instigated there, or they're pushing Taiwan to declare independence or do anything to try to break up the relationship over here, that's certainly a flashpoint. And they've been doing that for a while. And I think what you mentioned is really important also, that even Taiwan considers itself a part of China, and the previous instigations were the U.S. going to The Hague and making these rulings about the South China Sea against China mainland, which even Taiwan was disagreeing with. So I definitely think that is a flashpoint. But I think there's a lot more going on the Xinjiang side that we're not looking at as well. I mean, I think that a lot of people are focused on Taiwan and the South China Sea, but over in Xinjiang, I mean, you were talking about the Afghan war in the beginning. The real winners of that war were the military-industrial complex. If you look at their stock prices from 2001 to now, how much it's increased. If you look at where they're spending their money now, they're pouring millions and millions of dollars into think tanks to sell China threat stories, especially in regards to Xinjiang. One of those think tanks is called ASPI in Australia. They're funded in part by the U.S. State Department and also the military-industrial counter that China threat story that they just finished manufacturing. Then the other aspect of it is ETIM is the group that claimed responsibility for a lot of the attacks that happened in Xinjiang. Not too long ago, the U.S. removed them off of the terrorist list. They said that it's because they don't exist anymore and there's no credible evidence they exist. First of all, that's not something they do. The Tamil Tigers are still on the terrorist list and they haven't existed for even longer. And now you're starting to see terrorist attacks happen along Belt and Road points in outside of China. So I think that is even an even bigger possibility because we already see it unfolding. We saw it happen in Pakistan, Chinese engineers being killed at one of the dam projects. And these apologists, a large group of apologists, all of a sudden coming out pretending that, oh, well, there was no evidence that ETIM ever existed, even though there's actual records of military generals from the U.S. in 2018 actually saying they were airstriking ETIM in Afghanistan. Now, all of a sudden, I think they're going to be a convenient tool. And this is a playbook, I'm sure you're very aware, that they continually use over and over again since the last Cold War, funding the Mujahideen, to funding moderate rebels that they send into Syria. It just makes sense. The U.S. is spending $300 million a year for the next 7 years for anti-China propaganda against the Belt and Road Initiative. Why wouldn't they also use, other than soft power, hard power and these terrorist groups to also attack these points if it's something they're very familiar with and they know how to do and they've done over and over again?
They do. So, but here is a double problem with it,
Mm-hmm.
Daniel. First of all, Muslims are not that popular in the world. If you took, as they just did in Scotland today, a poll showed that in nice, progressive, nationalist Scotland, a huge majority of the people would not be happy if a significant number of new Muslim refugees and immigrants were to be directed into Scotland. Most people have been conscientized, paradoxically, by the very war party that now wishes to weaponize the Uyghur issue, have been conscientized by those same war parties actually to fear and loathe Muslims. Therefore, there is a ceiling, a glass ceiling, maybe it can be broken, but a ceiling on how much support you're going to generate in the Western world for the so-called plight, especially when you can provide no evidence, of Muslims in China. And the second problem amongst the Muslim audience is how come these people who have massacred Muslims all over the world, who don't give a toss for the fate of Muslims in Kashmir or in Palestine, how come they're so concerned about Muslims in China?
Yeah, I mean, there's a joke in China that a lot of people say that, a lot of people in the West, they don't like China and they don't like Muslims, but they really, really care about Chinese Muslims. It's really remarkable how they weaponize compassion in such a way, saying, no, you really need to care about this. I mean, because we've seen it over and over again. And I think that's why it's an effort that needs to happen from multiple angles. It's not just about Xinjiang. It's about Hong Kong. It's about Taiwan. It's about Xinjiang. And altogether, they just overwhelm overwhelm people with these things. Now, when you use language like that, when you use language like genocide and things like that, I think it's pretty easy to get enough people on board to say, okay, yeah, this is something we should care about, even though these are exactly the same kinds of things that has been lied about over and over again. But it is a bit of a paradox. And I have seen, because I have examined some of the people who seem to really care about what's going on in Xinjiang and either legitimately believe the propaganda or just pretending to believe it. And when you look through their history, they're saying extremely Islamophobic things 5 years ago, and all of a sudden they're standing up for the Uyghurs in Xinjiang. So I agree it's a paradox, but it's a paradox that does exist. These people are still coming out saying, yes, we need to help save the Uyghurs.
Sure.
Right.
It's a genocide without bodies, without refugees, without an exodus. And when you press them, as I have on this show, to define this genocide, they then switch to, well, they're not killing people, they're killing Islam, or they're killing the native customs. Having used the word genocide, of course, to imply the massacre of actual human beings. But quite quickly, they are forced to concede that there's no evidence at all of human beings being killed beyond the terrorists that are actually in Syria and on any picture you want to look at. We're in Libya. We're even in Nagorno-Karabakh fighting for the Turkic side in that conflict. The hollow claim of genocide doesn't stand up to much examination. But
it's true. Yeah, it's true.
The Huawei issue is another that I didn't mention that is conjured forth. Now, that has engendered actual economic sanctions against China, which has led actually to quite serious economic consequences in many industries in our own country, in America, and elsewhere, because Chinese parts can no longer now be imported and so on. So it's multi-level, isn't it? It's economic, it's cultural, it's religious, it's political, and it's also military, because we have ships sailing off the Chinese coast right now.
Right. Yeah, no, it is all over the place. I think that the Huawei thing, there's additional elements involved in that as well, too, where it's really interesting because the U.S. is constantly saying China copies everything. They need to innovate. They need to make their own stuff. When Huawei comes out with 5G first, or TikTok comes out with an amazing new social app, they try to ban it. And with Huawei, I feel like the problem there is they're going to these European countries and they're saying to them, don't use Huawei. There's these back doors. We can't show you where the back doors are. We don't have any evidence of it, but there might be back doors and they're going to use it to spy on you. And this is really interesting because what they're doing is they're saying that the Chinese might do exactly what the US is already doing, spying on, tapping Angela Merkel's phone, doing all of these things. There was a Belgian politician, Raoul, I can't remember his last name off the top of my head. He was saying that. He was saying all of these accusations don't come with any evidence. But then when we find out the US is spying on our leaders, we just say to them, oh, we're sorry, we'll speak slower next time so you can hear clearly everything we said. So I think that is also the story of losing hegemony. It might not be so much that they're afraid the Chinese will spy on their allies. It's that they lose the places. They are censored. Yeah, they're censored by. The Atlantic Council helps them censor people off that say things that are inconvenient to American foreign policy. When Soleimani was killed, and people were pointing out that he was on his way to a peace mission, or any of these additional pieces of context, people were removed, and these platforms came out with official statements saying that anybody who is empathetic towards the Iranian regime will be removed off of our platforms. And so, to imagine that now there's a new social media app like TikTok that so many people are using that maybe they won't have that level of control over, I think that's what's scaring them. So again, it goes back to hegemony. This is the big threat that China poses to America.
Now, Daniel, we've run out of time, so tell people how they can follow your work. I know, but I'd like you to tell them.
Sure, yeah. I'm on YouTube just under my name, Daniel Dumbrill, and also on Twitter. I don't really post anywhere else. But yeah, I'm just on those two platforms for the time being.
Well, I urge everyone to follow you right now, because You'll be grateful to me for that advice. Daniel Dumbrill, thank you for joining us on the Mother of
Thanks very
All
much.
Talk Shows. Now, my second question. In this week, in 1977, Elvis Presley, that's the real Elvis Presley, not the caller from last week, who made a decent imitation of Elvis, at least in the late Vegas years. In this week in 1977, Elvis Presley died of a heart attack at his home, Graceland. What did he always carry with him when he toured? A picture of his mother. B, the Bible. C, 3 suitcases of drugs. Answer after the break.
Radio Sputnik.
When the going gets tough, the powerful want propaganda. But we won't let them cancel the facts. Whether you're woke or drowsy, we know that you can handle the truth, and we're giving it to you every morning. Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan every Monday through Friday from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern. Your first stop for sanity in a world gone mad.
Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Now, what did you answer to my question? Did Elvis carry a picture of his mother, the Bible, or 3 suitcases of drugs? The answer was 3 suitcases of drugs, which may explain why he died in 1977. Now, the poll's going great guns. 1,200 people voted already. Will Prince Andrew testify in the US courts tomorrow? Yes, 5%. No, 59%. C, strings will be pulled, 36%. That's replicated more or less on YouTube and on Telegram. You've still got an hour or more to vote on that, so let me know. I had the terrible misfortune of learning about the day that Cinderella went woke. My children love Cinderella, and in truth, so have generations of children. But it turns out that it is a deeply sexist, misogynistic piece of work. The wicked stepmother wasn't really wicked, because women can't be wicked to each other. She's just a frustrated Lady Duncertain Age with a difficult relationship with her stepdaughter. Her stepdaughter doesn't really want to marry a prince, although my daughter does, and plays at Cinderella most days. Cinderella really wants to get on in her career and doesn't want to be kissed back to life. Doesn't necessarily even like apples. Cinderella actually didn't want to marry a prince, didn't want to marry at all, because of course that's the old patriarchy game. The new film of Cinderella has the prince who, as my next guest put it, quite brilliantly, how shall I put it, he said, doesn't look as if he'd be really that interested in a princess. He does ask Cinderella for her hand in marriage, but Cinderella turns him down. She wants to put her career first. It is a rewriting of history, a rewriting of our culture, but it's also dreadful. It is utterly boring and bereft of any circumstance that might have made Cinderella the story that Disney made it and that entertained so many generations of our young people. Michael Mccaffery is our resident film and culture critic, and I'm glad to welcome him back here onto the mother of all talk shows. Michael, you must have, because I'm sure we pay you to do so, you must have watched this dreadful film, Tell us about it.
Hello, George. It's great to see you again, and great to be here. Yes, I watched this movie for no other reason than I was paid to watch this movie. God help me. I did not receive combat pay, at least not yet, but I think I should have. You summed this movie up pretty good. It's a really dreadful movie. It's amateurish at best. But the thing that struck me about it when I was watching it was, my goodness, it is so relentlessly, aggressively woke and meaning to indoctrinate really young girls into this sort of worldview, which, you know, you can have your opinions on that, but just to give you a slight taste of how wonderful this movie is. You're correct. Cinderella is interested in her career first. She actually has a line where the prince, you know, says he loves her, and she says, well, if I have a choice, I choose me. And I thought, oh, wow, that's how educational for people to be so self-centered. Good for her. But she doesn't want to be the princess. The prince doesn't want to be the prince either. He doesn't want to be king. So thankfully, they wrote in a character, Princess Gwen, who is the younger sister of the prince, who is very frighteningly similar to Hillary Clinton. She's very smart, and no one listens to her. All these men just ignore her. The evil stepmother, of course, is not evil at all. She's just misunderstood because the patriarchy took away her dream of being a musician. And the fairy godmother is not a fairy godmother. It's a genderless godparent, played by Billy Porter, in an extravagant display of horrible acting. And James Corden shows up as well, which should make everybody so excited. James shows up playing a fat mouse, which, you know, as I said, my piece feels a little bit like typecasting to me, but hey, your mileage may vary on that. But this movie is just relentless in its sort of political point of view being put forth forward.
As you describe it so brilliantly, it's bound to win the Oscar and break box office records.
Well, yes. Well, it's funny you bring that up, because the film it's streaming on Amazon, and Amazon, as I wrote about this year, and I'm sure you're aware, they have new rules, you know, mandatory quotas in their entertainment products. And it's not just quotas in front of the camera, but also behind the camera. And in the narratives they're allowed to make. Disney has done the same thing. Of course, last year, the Academy Awards came out with their new rules that if you want to be considered for an award, you have to have certain quotas in front of the camera, behind the camera, and in the story. So this fits right in. Of course, considering how useless the Academy Awards are, this should get nominated multiple times this year, because it checks all the boxes that they think they need to check to get in. Of course, God help us if it does. I can't imagine it would. It's so dreadful. It's remarkable how awful this movie is. It really is. And I just want to say to you, George, you're welcome for having me watch it so that you don't have to.
There's a lot of our viewers and listeners saying that to themselves right now. The one thing that you can, I think, be sure of is that our daughters will not be clamoring to see it, because it is bereft of all magic. And when you're a little girl, trust me, I mean, my daughters are the daughters of revolutionary parents. We are not royalists. We are not capitalists. We are revolutionary people. But our daughters, for some reason, are interested in palaces and princesses and unicorns and princes kissing princesses and asking for their hand in marriage. So if that's my daughters, I think most people's daughters are the same. So it's not likely to appeal to young girls, is it? Who is it made for? Hillary Clinton?
Well, That's the question, right? Who is it made for? And of course, the reason it's made at all is because James Corden produces this, by the way, and it's a jukebox.
The plot thickens.
Musical. Yeah, right. Yeah. So, strike two, and it's a jukebox musical, which he has sort of made a career out of his, carpool karaoke. So it's popular songs, and the lead in it is Camila Cabello, who's a pop star. So it's meant to sort of appeal to a certain strain of young girl, but it doesn't. And who it really is meant to appeal to is the people making, so that they can sort of signal their virtue of, oh, look how progressive we are. Look how, on the surface, of course, their progressivism, that sort of thing. Now, it's interesting. Cinderella, the fairy tale, came to prominence in 1950 with the Disney version, which has been enormously successful. It's very well done. But it gets made sort of every generation. In 97, Whitney Houston played the fairy godmother in one. Hilary Duff was in 2004 was sort of at the height of her popularity. She played Cinderella. And just a few years ago, I think it was 2015, Kenneth Branagh directed a version of Cinderella starring Lily James. It had a terrific cast. Kate Blanchett was in it. Helena Bonham Carter was in it. And it was very, very faithful to the original material. And that film, which, I would not run out to a movie theater to see just because it's not for me, but that movie made $500 million.
Wow.
And it didn't win any awards. It wasn't a big deal, but it made a ton of money. And it made a ton of money because the Cinderella fairy tale, as all fairy tales do, it's why they resonate with people, connects with people on a much, much deeper level than just the surface story of, a boy meets a girl and she becomes princess, he's the prince. It works on an archetypal level, which is why little girls love it. And little boys actually watch those things and appreciate them. The archetypal level is not about a woman being subservient to the man who, quote unquote, saves her. It's about the coming together, and this is Jungian psychology, so forgive me if it's a bit much, but it's the coming together of the opposites. So the feminine and the masculine come together as equals to create the whole. And the whole is the kingdom. The kingdom is made whole when the prince finds the princess and they come together in agreement. The feminine and the masculine.
Heaven forfend. Heaven forfend.
Yes.
We'll be run out of here, Michael. The very idea of it. And I don't know if you're a football fan, but yesterday was a miraculous day. Cristiano Ronaldo.
I was going to mention it, George. Yes, I was going to mention it.
Cristiano Ronaldo set the country alight with his return to Old Trafford. And all of my life, which has been a long one, there's been a man of the match. I noticed overnight that Cristiano Ronaldo is now the player of the match. Even though he's a man, even though it was men's football, and everybody on the park playing with him and against him was also a man, he cannot now be called man of the match. Just think about
Well,
that.
thank goodness for that, because how damaged would people feel if Cristiano Ronaldo was the man of the match? That would harm so many people. That's an act of violence, George. I'm sure you know that.
Michael Mccaffery, well, you are the oracle on film and culture, and I'm glad to say you're our man. And the check's in the post for watching that movie. Thank you very much for doing it. Now, the news is next with Jamie Lowe, but coming up after it are some pretty cracking guests. Dr. Bob Gill on vaccine apartheid, and the one and only Rachel Blevins will be talking about Trump, about the US media, and all things American. Stay tuned. It's the mother of all talk shows.
Radio Sputnik News.
The FBI has released a newly declassified document detailing support given to the Saudi hijackers in the lead-up to the 9/11 terrorist attacks. Released on the 20th anniversary of the attacks, it details contact the hijackers had with Saudi associates in the United States, but does not provide proof senior Saudi government officials were complicit in the plot. The 16-page document is the first to be disclosed since President Joe Biden ordered a declassification review of materials. Bereaved families have long sought the information in hopes of implicating the Saudi government, with many coming out against Biden's involvement in the 9/11 memorial events if the documents remain classified. A long-running lawsuit in federal court in New York aims to hold the Saudi government accountable and alleges Saudi officials provided significant support to some of the hijackers before the attacks. Britain's Health Secretary Sajid Javid has said he wants to remove the PCR test requirement when returning from some foreign countries as soon as, quote, he possibly can, as he confirmed plans for vaccine passports to get into crowded venues had been axed. Javid said he was aware of the cost for families holidaying abroad and that the testing measures should not be in place, quote, for a second longer than is absolutely necessary. He said he had asked officials to remove the PCR rule, quote, at the moment we can. He confirmed that the vaccine proposal will not be going ahead after significant revolt by Tory backbenchers. Plans to raise national insurance to fund health and social care could lead to the breakdown of struggling families, the UK's tax authority says. Ministers announced the tax hike last week to pay for an £86,000 personal cap on lifetime social care costs in England and tackle NHS backlogs. However, the HMRC analysis has predicted it will have a significant impact on wages, inflation and company profits. Labour Shadow Health Secretary Jonathan Ashworth called the proposals a punishing unfair tax rise on working people. The 1.25 percentage point rise in national insurance, a tax paid by workers and employers, will begin next April before becoming a separate health and social care levy from April 2023. It's expected to raise £12 billion a year for the next 3 years. Rohullah Azizi, the brother of Afghanistan's former vice president, has been shot dead by the Taliban, his nephew has said. Azizi, the brother of Amarullah Saleh, was travelling in the northern Panjshir province when his car was stopped by Taliban fighters at checkpoint. Saleh led forces resisting the Taliban in Panjshir, which was the last hideout province in Afghanistan to be overrun by Taliban fighters. His nephew said it was unclear where Azizi was headed when the Taliban stopped him. He added phones were not working in the area. Videos shared online allegedly show the Taliban opening fire on anti-Taliban fighters in Panjshir. Afghan universities will be segregated by gender and a new Islamic dress code will be introduced, the Taliban said today. Higher Education Minister Abdul Baqi Haqqani indicated women would not be allowed to study alongside men. He also announced a review of subjects taught. Women and girls are banned from schools and universities under Taliban rule between 1996 and 2001. The new policy marks a significant change from the accepted practice before the Taliban takeover. Universities were co-educational, with men and women studying side by side, and female students did not have to abide by a dress code. The announcement of the higher education policy comes a day after the Taliban raised their flag over the presidential palace, signalling the beginning of their administration. 2 more towns have been evacuated and soldiers are being deployed as a wildfire continues to burn in Spain's Costa del Sol. The battle is being made more difficult by complicated terrain and the virulent behaviour of the fire, officials said. The blaze in a mountainous area above the resort of Estepona, popular with British tourists, has killed 1 emergency worker since it started on Wednesday. Fanned by strong winds and high late summer temperatures, it appears to have been started deliberately, Regional Environmental Chief Carmen Crespo said. And finally, Emma Raducanu, the 18-year-old tennis player and the first British woman in 44 years to win the US Open, won't be celebrating in champagne after she landed the $2 million check. But she will be binging on chocolate, she said. Clutching at the trophy in numerous photo cells, she said she does not want to let go of it after her fairy tale in New York, culminating in the ultimate happy ending. Raducanu was the first qualifier to win a Grand Slam singles title and the first not to drop a set. Quote, "It means everything to hold this trophy, and I don't want to let go of it right now," she told her former British number one Tin Henman. Raducanu came through 10 matches to win the title, including 3 qualifying rounds, and beat Olympic champion Belinda Bencic and in-form Maria Sakkari in the quarter and semi-finals respectively. Quote, "For me, I don't feel absolutely any pressure," she said. "I'm still only 18 and I'm just having a free swing at anything that comes my way." And that's the latest here on Sputnik News. I'm Jamie Lowe.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
Only around 7% of you on average across the 3 platforms think that Prince Andrew will testify in the US courts. It is extraordinary, isn't it, how low our expectations are of at least the lower orders of our royal family. 58% of you think he will not, and 37% of you, more than a third, think that strings will be pulled. We'll see about that. Now, if you've got a point of view on anything you've heard so far, or anything at all, here are the phone numbers if you're calling from the United Kingdom. And remember, it's completely free. The number is 08081965522. That's 08081965522. If you're in the United States, equally, it's completely free. And the number is +1 844 944 3344. That's +1 844 944 3344. You can also email the show anytime at all at onair, O-N-A-I-R, onair at moats.tv. James Halliday says, "Fabulous opening statement tonight. No wonder people love the mother of all talk shows." Many thanks, James, for that. Tom says, "Two great crimes. One spawns the other. 9/11, Afghanistan." And Idris says, "The West demands an inclusive government from the Taliban, which includes all the ethnicities and women. How about asking your friends in Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, and elsewhere to do the same?" Very good, Idris. 4X Gold says, "Yes, George, the Saudis are the convenient hitmen of the United States. Afghanistan in the 80s, Syria and Libya in the 2010s, etc. ad infinitum." And John Rooney says, "George Orwell, the war isn't meant to be won. It's meant to be continuous. The British Empire is sending a warship to China. Is China next?" Unfortunately, John, it's our only warship, really, and the Chinese could sink it just like that. It's a stupid, foolish waste and risk of our best naval asset, which should be defending our own country, not to mention the thousands of naval personnel on board. Sean Murphy says, "Al-Qaeda and ISIS were created by the USA. You reap what you sow." And Alexandros says, "Afghanistan was destroyed twice by the American regime. Firstly, when they sent in the Islamists, and secondarily in the war, and with the same monster they created." Another Sean Calder says, "How do 2 buildings designed to withstand a direct impact from an airliner free fall into their own footprint? Grenfell didn't. In fact, no other high-rise building has ever fallen due to fire." And Jack Klugman, great name, says, "The New York Times just showed that the Pentagon droning after the Kabul airport bombing killed a father and his children, and they totally lied again." It's worse than that, Jack. Not only was the father that they killed not an ISIS terrorist, he was an aid worker working for a US aid charity. Not only were the people in the back of his pickup truck not on their way to a series of suicide bombings, they were not people at all, but water bottles. And thirdly, they didn't just kill the father, they killed his 10 children as well. Fair play to the New York Times, which revealed all of that information I have just given you. Now, it's a vexatious story, vaccination these days, though I'm not entirely sure why. Almost all of us have been vaccinated as children against all of the diseases that used to lay us waste. I get the point that the COVID vaccine is experimental in the sense it has not gone through the long period of trialing that other vaccines have done, but it could scarcely be so because the world faced an emergency that at the time looked as if it might become the Black Plague, which I remind you, wiped out a third of the population of this country. A third. At today's population equivalent, that would have been in excess of 20 million people dead. Now, it didn't turn out that way, but the drive for a vaccination and the rollout of the vaccination is probably the only two good things that we did in our handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. I've had the jabs twice, and I'll have the booster when it comes along. I figure that it quite obviously is not going to stop you getting COVID, but has a fair chance of stopping you dying from it, and that'll do me. But equally, I'm entirely opposed to compulsory vaccination. I'm entirely opposed to COVID passports, which it seems this day that the Boris Johnson government is now retreating from, leaving, as oftentimes, the Scottish government of Nicola Sturgeon up the creek without a paddle. She is going ahead with COVID passports, and she was doing so on the assumption that Boris Johnson was going to implement them here in England. So I don't know how she'll handle that. I'm against it. I'm against it for all kinds of reasons. It is a kind of apartheid that they have in mind. I have no idea if the eminent physician, Dr. Bob Gill, a man who's done more to campaign to save the health service in Britain than any other person. He's one of my heroes. He is a GP, although God knows how he fits it all in, because you'll find him on the campaign trail almost perpetually, fighting for the health of our people and the health service which underpins it. And I'm glad to say he joins us now. Dr. Bob, thank you for joining us on board the mother of all talk shows. I gave you my position on the vaccines. What's yours?
Hi, George. Thank you for inviting me on. I agree with your points about avoiding compulsion. I think that's not a direction we should be going in healthcare in this country. Vaccine passports may seem appealing to some, but the worry is this is a thin edge of the wedge. It might be a gate, a device for entry into accessing healthcare in general, and it's a very divisive step. And what function does it serve? Because if you've been vaccinated, you can still get infected and you can still transmit the virus. So there's no logical reason that a passport means that you can't be spreading the virus. So it's a flawed idea, and it might lead elsewhere, which we don't want to go as a nation. But in terms of vaccine apartheid, well, in the last few days, Professor Sarah Gilbert of the AstraZeneca Oxford team cast doubt on the need for a booster vaccine, certainly for a large proportion of the population in this country, because the work they've done with their trial patients is that after a year of being vaccinated, they found the level of protection by the two vaccines that people have already had is still relatively high. So the case to have a third booster is weak for the general population. There is an exception, of course, those highly vulnerable people with a defective immune system, and that's about 500,000 people in the UK. But for everybody else, the case is not being made strongly that a booster would be that helpful.
But it wouldn't be harmful, would it?
Well, it wouldn't be harmful, but we live in a world where, for example, in Africa, the percentage of population vaccinated is around 2%. And as you said earlier, over 80% of this country's adults over the age of 16 have been vaccinated. So where would that vaccine do the most good? And we all realize that, this is a global pandemic. Variants can arise in unvaccinated populations. The more we let this fire continue to burn in other countries, then the risk of a new variant developing, which is vaccine resistant, coming back to bite us in the bottom, is still there. And we have to weigh up that risk against the benefit, the small marginal benefit that a third booster jab would give us here.
Why do you think the Tories have U-turned on this? It seemed as if Boris Johnson was going for the vaccine passport, and it seems from the Health Secretary's comments in the papers today that they're backing off. Why?
I suspect there may be pressure amongst the sort of libertarian wing of the Tory party to avoid going down this road. Maybe they've seen the protests in France and across other European countries against the idea of a vaccine passport. So, they don't want to fight on multiple fronts. I don't think the agenda of getting some sort of person identification, whether it be on the back of vaccination or some other ruse, that will pop up again, I'm pretty sure. But at the moment, they've decided to duck the issue.
The travel issues, I haven't yet tried. Looks nightmarish to me. But if I was to decide to take the Channel Tunnel tomorrow, how do I prove that I've had the double vaccination?
Well, there is a facility for you to print off your vaccination status. So that avoids an electronic complicated process. The fear that people have with the electronic vaccine passport is what are the data.
Have we lost Bob?
And be transferred to foreign governments and foreign.
Yeah, Bob, repeat that answer because we lost you momentarily.
So there is an NHS site you can go to and print off the fact that you've had the vaccination so that you can present that as evidence, and there's no problem with that. Despite being vaccinated, you could still transmit the virus, so you need to do lateral flow tests, although they're unreliable, but they're required before travel. And it's still very complicated. And Sajid Javid, Health Secretary today, is hoping to drop the requirement for the PCR test for travellers returning to the UK. But that is also not a very scientific thing to do because the lateral flow test is unreliable and the PCR is the gold standard test.
You're the expert. I bow to your superior knowledge, but I'm getting the sense, although I believe entirely in the vaccine, I urge everyone to have it, it has not provided the level of protection that perhaps people thought it was going to. I was in a cab today. The man, like me, had been double vaccinated. He wasn't that younger than me, so he was an older man, but quite fit. And he got COVID, and it nearly killed him. He was 10 days flat out. He collapsed in the street and so on. Am I right in saying that that most of us thought that the vaccine would provide more protection than it actually has?
I think the public generally in this country have a great faith in vaccination programs in general. The problem with the coronavirus vaccine is that although it gives you protection, it's not complete, you are still susceptible to get the infection. But we do know that if you've been double vaccinated and you get coronavirus, the chances of you becoming seriously ill, requiring admission to intensive care unit and potentially dying are dramatically reduced. So it's not perfect, but it's the best thing we have.
It's the best thing we have, and it's a no-brainer when you put it like that. It's bad. He said to me, please don't get it. Well, of course, I'm not in control of that. I might catch the coronavirus, but however bad his was or mine would be, he didn't die of it, and he's back at work. 80%, you say, Bob?
That's
in
right.
Britain. 2%. 2% in some of the poorest countries. Why is that? Is there a shortage of the serum, or just a shortage of money in poor countries to pay for it?
There are several factors. At the beginning, the drug companies refused to remove their patent on these vaccines, so that limited the production. Certainly production in other countries wasn't ramped up. So there was almost like a protection racket in progress. Now, Western countries have bought up the capacity, most of the world capacity for producing the vaccine, and there's accusations of vaccine hoarding in terms of utilizing future capacity and production. Now, there are moves, some powerful voices saying we need to remove the patent protection, we need to boost production overseas, and we need to strongly consider the opportunity cost of providing a booster here, as opposed to giving a first vaccine in countries like Africa. The first vaccine provides a lot of protection over and above the small additional protection that a third booster might provide in the richer countries. So that is the balance that people have to make.
In a sane and rational world, that would be a dichotomy that would be worth making a decision on. But how to put it? It's a false dichotomy, because if they don't give it to me, they're not going to give it to a poor country that can't pay for it instead, are they?
Well, that is the problem, although the WHO did set up a system where the rich countries could subsidize vaccination for the poor countries. But, the rich countries, the US, the UK, were major obstacles for the removal of the patent. So they drove up the cost themselves. And you have to wonder whose interests are the government serving. Is it Big Pharma, or is it control of the pandemic on an international basis? And I'm afraid they've towed the line for Big Pharma.
Doctor, you're an officer and a gentleman. Thank you very much for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. A reminder of the phone numbers. I'm sure there will be many who wish to take issue with me and with Dr. Bob. The number is 08081 965522 if you're in the United Kingdom. If you're in the United States, it's +1 844 944 3344, and it is entirely free. You can, of course, also tweet me, as a very large number of people have already done. I won't get through them all. Forgive me if I don't get to yours. Jennifer Delgatti says, Ghislaine Maxwell will squeal on the prince to save her ass. And Joanne says 9 of the 13 hijackers were Saudi citizens, and the rest were from Pakistan, North African Arab countries. But the country that hasn't anything to do with it gets punished. And Nemo says, I think Gigi is starting to respect Trump just a tad. Well, you're entirely wrong. I only, as I said at the time, I'm not happy that Donald Trump is the president of the United States, but I'm very happy that Hillary Clinton isn't. That's all I'm going to say. I won't be forced to choose between the lesser of two evils, because that means evil wins every time. and the benchmark of evilness, the pivot of evilness, moves ever in the direction of evil. So I supported Dr. Jill Stein against both Clinton and Trump. And I hoped very much that Governor Jesse Ventura would make a serious run for the presidency last time. What I do is not respect Donald Trump, but describe, analyze Donald Trump, and in particular, the voting base in which he is swimming. Because only a fool doesn't want to understand politics, because politics will affect everything. And whether Trump or Kamala Harris is the president will make a difference. Maybe not a large one, maybe not always a good one or a bad one, whoever won it, but it will make a big difference. So it is important to properly define and analyze the support base of someone like Donald Trump. And I said earlier that Donald Trump is appealing big time appealing to the working class of America, who regard the Democrats, who used to claim to represent them, as rancid traitors, who care nothing about them, and whose purpose is to line their own and their other friends' pockets. That's what the blue-collar American thinks. And the blue-collar American thinks. It's not me that thinks it. It's the blue-collar American that thinks it, that Donald Trump is more their kind of guy. That's my analysis. Doesn't mean I like Donald Trump or that I respect Donald Trump. It's my analysis that the downtrodden, oppressed people of America think that Trump, not the Republicans, Trump has more to do with them than Joe Biden and Kamala Harris ever will. That's just something you're going to need to accept. Now, in 1928, the Scottish bacteriologist Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin while researching influenza. How? A, from urine, B, from infected blood samples, C, in mold. Answer coming up after the break.
Radio Sputnik.
Downloads of the podcast, huge numbers are downloading this week's highlights in the UK and in the US, but also in countries like Japan, India, Denmark, Saudi Arabia. You probably get executed for that. Korea, Switzerland, the UAE, and Hong Kong in China. Thank you for all the great reviews you've been leaving on Apple Podcasts, and including this one. In British politics, Mr. Galloway stands as the last bastion of sense. Like a fine wine, he gets better with age. I have been a fan of his since 2002. I would recommend anyone to listen to him. The best podcast around. Thank you very much indeed. That was touching testimony. Thank you so much. If you do listen, give a 5-star review. Why don't you?
You are listening to the Mother of All Talk Shows podcast with George Galloway.
They're bringing drugs. They're bringing crime.
I like beer. Yeah, we drank beer.
Whoever's in charge, and I want the record.
Let's talk about that. Discussing all the controversies and news across the disunited states of America. Tune in to Fault Lines every weekday from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern, only on Radio Sputnik.
Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Now, the answer is mold. Most of you knew that, but it was a brilliant and world-changing event. I think he fell asleep or he went away for a few days. He came back and saw mold. I think it might have been milk, but it was on some kind of cup and some kind of plate. And the great Scotsman, Alexander Fleming, changed the world on the back of it. I wonder how many millions, maybe hundreds of millions of lives Alexander Fleming has saved by his discovery of penicillin. Now, Ibrahim just asked on Facebook how he can ring in from the Caribbean. Well, we're all waiting now, Ibrahim. The best number for you to call is the US one. The poll is going big, but overwhelmingly people think that Prince Andrew will not be testifying through his lawyers in the US courts tomorrow or any other time. But getting on for 40% of you think that strings will be pulled in any case. Let's take some calls. Paul is in London. Go ahead, Paul.
Hi, Mr. Galloway, a big fan of Moats. It's actually been my go-to place for information throughout the pandemic, Mr. Galloway. I'm just wanting your own opinion, because I trust it a lot. Do you think the vaccine has lost its efficacy I only found out tonight, listening to your show, that Boris Johnson has cancelled the vaccine passport. That does make me happy. I've spoken to a few doctors. I'll get it if I have to. But as long as they're making it mandatory, I just don't feel the time is right to commit yet.
I think these are powerful points, Paul. No, I don't think that the vaccine is losing its efficacy. Obviously, with each new variant, there are new challenges. I don't think it's losing its efficacy. What I think is the case is that I think most people, thought that it would provide more efficacy than it actually is capable of doing. But I'll settle, Paul, as Dr. Bob Gill just said there. I'll settle for it not killing me. I'll settle for it not putting me in the ICU. If I've got to get it, catch it, then I'll have to live with that. I'm not looking forward to it, and I've avoided it until now. But if that were to happen, then I have a high probability that I will not end up in the intensive care. I will not end up dead from the coronavirus. And that's good enough for me. Thanks, Paul. Jim is in Florida on 9/11. Go ahead, Jim.
Hi, George.
Hi.
I'm honored to be on the show.
Thank you.
I just wanted to mention that in your opening in your opening elegy, really, for 9/11, I wanted to say that I agreed with every point you made, except that you tended to reinforce the official version of events, which just doesn't hold water. There's two words that can kind of puncture that whole view, and those two words are Building 7, which collapsed all by itself with nothing hitting it. Most of the people I know here in America are agreed that 9/11 was an inside job, and that, yes, although there were all those crazies from Saudi Arabia and elsewhere who were involved, and yes, I saw the planes hit the buildings too on my television, minutes after it happened. But the actual engineering evidence is that thermite was used to demolish the buildings. They fell at exactly straight down, exactly the way demolished buildings would. And that's not just my word. There's a lovely website called Architects and engineers.
Yeah, I've had them on the show. In fact, when I briefly had Moats Extra, we interviewed the top man from that outfit. Actually, we should put that out as a podcast now, Chris, if you're listening. And of course, he makes a powerful case. Here's my problem with it. I'm not disagreeing with you. I think there's a lot of things about 9/11 we don't yet know. We didn't know until this week that high-ranking Saudi diplomatic staff were openly and repeatedly working with people who would later fly the buildings into, fly the airplanes into the buildings. So there's lots we don't know. Lots we don't know. And Building 3 is, the third building is a very powerful and as yet unanswered conundrum. I suppose I have two problems with your thesis. The first is, if you're going to fly airplanes into these buildings, why would you also need to demolish them with thermite? The terrorist atrocity of flying airliners into two of America's landmark buildings would have been quite sufficient for a casus belli, for a war against Afghanistan, Iraq, Islamist forces around the world. My second problem with it is the conspiracy, if it were, of an inside job would have to be so significant because if unmasked, it would bring down the whole political system in the United States. It wouldn't just bring down a government or a party. It would bring down democracy itself if it were revealed to be the case that the American government conducted this whole thing themselves, that so many people would have to know about that 20 years on, they'd probably have sung by now, if only for a fee. Last word to you, Jim.
Well, I agree with your points, George, and I think they're completely plausible. I think that perhaps I don't think an entire government agency had to be concerned. It's a matter of elements within. And in other words, many of us compare 9/11 to the Reichstag fire, for example.
Yeah, well, the jury's out. The jury's out on that one too. Jim, it's been a pleasure.
You got it.
Disagreeing with you, or not really disagreeing, a friendly exchange. Neil is in Epping, in Essex. Let's hear from Neil. Go ahead, Neil.
Hello, George.
Hi.
Long time admirer of you.
Thank you.
I was with you with the first 9/11 in Chile, in the Chile Solidarity Campaign.
Wow.
Please excuse my being out of breath. This is my first call and the last call as I have a terminal illness. You were true to us all the way. During the miners' strike, I had miners staying with me. My surgery supplies were opened and roughly resealed. My partner, my senior partner, who'd fled from one lunatic called Idi Amin, when I explained to him about he said, "Go ahead, I will cover you." But you always give us hope, George. We love you. Keep fighting for the cause. Keep fighting for Assange. And I was sorry, I was too ill to go up to Batley. I wanted so much to be there. I was really on the marches against the Iraq War, and I would recommend everybody sees your notes with the Miami Show Band, explaining what Britain's depredations in Ireland, and your David Kelly DVD is an absolute masterpiece. None of my colleagues believed that David Kelly killed himself, and your work for Palestine is wonderful, and thanks again to you, and also Mr. Ben and Mr. DL, and also Jeremy Corbyn for giving us hope before the war criminal Blair and his henchmen has got to him. But thank you very much.
That's the most powerful call perhaps we'll ever have, Neil. I'm humbled and moved to have received it. I pray that God strengthens you,
Thank you.
and that you live long. I pray that the spirit that you have displayed in that telephone call, despite your breathlessness, despite your illness, is heard and emulated by others. It is a long story. We've been together, as you say, from 9/11, 1973, and probably also before that. But 1973 was the first 9/11, when the United States murdered the president of Chile, destroyed the parliament of Chile, coordinated from the war room in Washington, the Chilean Air Force overthrowing the elected government of Chile, which was known as the England of South America, a highly developed democratic country. And of course, Neil, as you know, the leader of the fascistic coup that overthrew President Allende was later invited to tea with Margaret Thatcher, whilst the Foreign Secretary, Jack Straw, the Labour Foreign Secretary, Jack Straw, fixed it so that Pinochet would not be extradited to Spain, where he was wanted on torture charges. Last word, Neil.
Well, thank you. It's been an honour talking to you. And any time I get down in the dumps, I watch you knocking the people on Capitol Hill for 6. It's absolutely wonderful. Thank you.
God bless you. Thank you. Talking to you. Thank you, Neil. God bless you. Now, difficult to know what to say after that. Neil, thanks very much for that call. It's really touched me. This is the week in 1965 that the Beatles released Yesterday. What was it originally called? Haha. A, scrambled eggs. B, Mandalay. C, red onions. Oh, that's a hard one. Answer after the break.
Radio Sputnik.
Let's take a call. Go ahead, Kenny.
Hi, George. Yeah, I just want to talk about the trans issue that you were speaking about earlier. I've got a book in front of me by Douglas Murray, and he's got a paragraph here that I'd just like to read out, if that's okay.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I was standing on the corner at a quarter.
All right, I'll get him off. He's a nutter. He's a nutter. In the UK, it's 08081 965 522, and in the US it's +1 844 944 3344.
Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Well, I'm glad they changed the name, because Yesterday would otherwise have been forever remembered by its original name, which was Scrambled Eggs. Scrambled eggs. Oh, how I love your eggs. Legs. Will Prince Andrew testify in the US courts? Yes, only 4% of you think that he will. No, 57%. Strings will be pulled, 39%. And well over 2,000 people have voted in that poll. You've got 5 minutes left if you want to add your point of view. Now, it's all kicked off in the United States, of course, for the 2024 presidential election. And yet it will probably be fought between two gerontocrats. Bernie Sanders, aged 80, is spry. But the sight of prancing Joe Biden with his tiny little fairy steps, I wondered why he kept breaking into a run. And the reason is to disguise the fact that his gait has become so shrunken that he actually walks in fairy steps in a kind of prance. When I saw people booing him at the 9/11 memorial yesterday, I actually momentarily at least felt sorry for him. Donald Trump, on the other hand, is full of life and vigor. He might not be by 2024, but I think he's going to run. Let's see if the one and only Rachel Blevins agrees with me. Rachel. She's after 9 o'clock. I beg your pardon. Let me go to the phone lines. Theo is in Spain on 9/11. Go ahead, Theo.
Hi, George.
Hi.
Not my real name. George, do you recall some 12 years ago when you were at TalkSport?
I do, of course.
Carl from Pasto, a couple of times, or three perhaps, he told you of a YouTube channel uploading clips of your radio show. Do you recall that?
I don't, but do tell me.
I was the man behind the channel.
Okay. Very nice to hear from you, Theo. You're now in Spain, or have you always been in Spain?
I'm a Spaniard.
Okay. That's even more interesting. Well, I'm grateful to you for all that you did back then. The TalkSport days were quite riotous days. We had a wonderful cult show back then. But of course, now we've multiplied our audience exponentially. So welcome on to the new mother of all talk shows. What would you like to say, Theo?
So, George, 9/11. Right. In the 2 months prior to the attacks, bin Laden was admitted to an American military hospital in Dubai, as reported by French intelligence. The news were picked up by Le Figaro and replicated in British media. I saw it there.
There's absolutely no doubt that until at least 1998 and the embassy bombings in Dar es Salaam and Nairobi, bin Laden was an asset of the United States empire, no doubt.
So according to these reports, he also met the CIA regional chief while at the hospital. He had a kidney failure.
And you say this was 3 months before?
Yeah, July 2001.
July 2001, yeah.
Now, George, a couple more points about 9/11. If you watch the original footage, the towers, both of them, collapsed in about 8 to 9 seconds. That's free fall speed. That's a 400-meter tall tower collapsing completely to the ground in 8 seconds. It's 40 meters collapsing per second. The frame of the building was made of steel, and yet it failed to oppose any resistance to free fall, which is something not ever seen before or after. And between all the rubble, very conveniently for the narrative that they wanted to launch, the endless wars and so on, very conveniently between the rubble of 9/11 at Ground Zero, there appeared the passports of the hijackers, totally unharmed. And this was, back then, this was picked up by The Guardian. And finally, George, Ground Zero, it was burning for 3 months after the attacks. It was burning until December. What kind of fire does burn for 3 months without additional oil or fuel or whatever?
Well, of course, I hear all of that, Theo. I put the same point to you that I put to the caller from Florida. In order to carry out an operation that big, which risked the Republic itself, if unmasked, you would have to have a lot of manpower. Why has none of that manpower ever spoken out about this dastardly conspiracy that you describe?
I'm not necessarily saying that there is a conspiracy, but those that I mentioned, they are facts, and they were even picked up.
Well, not all of them were facts, Theo. Some of them were newspaper reports, and I've grown used to not automatically believing newspaper reports. So the fact that Le Figaro said that bin Laden was in a US military hospital in Dubai and met American intelligence there does not automatically persuade me, I'm afraid. Neither does the fact that the Guardian ran a story, even less so, does that automatically persuade me. I'm not saying that you're wrong about those two things. I'm saying that you need better evidence than newspaper reports.
I would agree, and I would normally trust them. But if they are saying something that goes or appears to go against the prevailing interest of the establishment...
well, Le Figaro on the Iraq issue was pro-Iraq against the war. It was pro-Chirac. In fact, it was, in many ways, of all the European newspapers, the most sympathetic to the Iraqi government. So I'm not discounting what you say, and certainly not discounting everything that's in Le Figaro or was. It's just not evidence. I need evidence, Theo.
Okay, yeah. Anyway, I wasn't pointing to the conspiracy. And I've looked into it so much, but I've never found anything that could persuade me to think that it was all planned by George Bush. Definitely not by him. In my personal opinion, that was done at some level or allowed to happen, if you know what I mean.
Maybe allowed to happen is a better way of putting it. Theo, that's been a pleasure talking to you. I'm grateful for your call. But I must go to Idaho. Who wouldn't? To talk with Eve. Eve on Cinderella in Idaho. It doesn't get any better it doesn't get any better, Eve.
Thank you. No, I just wanted to tell you that by the way, I watch Killing Kelly, and it's very good. And I'm telling you why I find it so good is that it's very apolitical. I found that you put the minimum politics thing in it, and it gives a lot of strength to the story. Okay, this is my...
Thanks, Eve. I really appreciate that.
But no, I wanted to tell you that, let's suppose, since you know about movie and so on, and I tell you, look, you have our policy now is to depopulate the planet. This is our goal, and let's suppose you agree with it, and I ask you to redo Cinderella in a way that encourages people to have no children. What would you have done different than what they did?
It's a good point. It's a very good point. I'm assailed every time I advocate for bigger family sizes, more children, by people who want to depopulate the planet. And they are people who presumably think of themselves as right on and radical. There are significant numbers of people in this world, many of them powerful, who secretly or openly have this Malthusian spirit. So you're right. it fits that agenda.
Yes, it does. Yeah, and if you let me, I have a comment. I was in New York September 11. I was working Midtown. And I want to tell you something about evidence. I agree with you that we don't know anything, but we have one piece of evidence, is that they don't want us to know. For me, that's an evidence.
I'm with you on that. I agree with you on that.
Yeah.
They were forced into a highly partial disclosure of unbelievably important material this week, because otherwise Biden would have been shunned by all the widows and orphans of the victims because he was covering up something that is unbelievably important, that Saudi embassy officials and Saudi intelligence officers were working with the hijackers. That tells us there's a lot we don't know, Yves.
Absolutely, and we know that when they blocked the airplane, no plane could fly. We know only of two planes which were allowed to fly, is an Israeli plane and a Saudi plane, who were allowed to leave the U.S.
Not only that, but on board that Saudi plane were hundreds of members of the Bin Laden family.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, but isn't it good enough to invent story in order to keep the thing alive? Because we would like to know.
Indeed. Yves, thanks for that. Let's go to San Francisco. Who wouldn't? Jim is on the line there. Jim.
Hello, George. This is Jim calling from San Francisco.
Welcome, sir. What would you like to say?
Well, I've been a big fan of yours for hundreds of years, as a matter of fact.
Thank you so much.
Ever since you read Congress, the Riot Act back in 05, 06, whenever it was.
05, yeah.
I wanted to talk to you very briefly about the Internet and media in general and your show and its relationship.
Thanks. Go on.
I don't need to remind you that the Internet is not a public commons. It's not even a regulated utility. No. It's a collection of private servers whose owners believe they should decide what kind of information crosses their machines.
Yeah.
So websites that carry, questionable points of view risk having their addresses simply shut off.
Yeah.
This is why I think that you shouldn't tolerate any kind of alternative points of view, conspiracy theories on your show. You shouldn't talk to them or listen to them or allow any exposure whatever, no matter what you believe or how damning the evidence for or against might be. And if you'll indulge me for a minute or so, I'd like to make the case very briefly why this is important.
Yeah, go on.
In December 2019, the University of Alaska Fairbanks published the results of a 3-year comprehensive study on the collapse of the Salomon Brothers Building 7 in New York City. And in this study, Dr. Hulsey and his team of grad students examined every possible explanation for that collapse that hundreds of witnesses saw and photographed. And he demonstrated conclusively now, authoritatively, that the failure that both you and I saw could not have been the result of any combination of internal fire or exterior damage from falling debris. That is to say, it could only have been an intentional, precisely pre-planned demolition. And then they went on to specify the exact column failure timing that was required to allow that degree of symmetry. And this report is on the UAF website today, right now as we speak, for everyone to see. Even most of the 9/11 truthers, so to speak, aren't aware of it. And these results were not discussed anywhere. Nowhere in the entire Western media was this even reported. So my point being that anyone who discusses these kind of taboo subjects, like our mutual friends Jesse Venturia,
I wouldn't be me, and Moats wouldn't be Moats if we did not tackle the big issues head on. It's the news coming up with Jamie Lowe and the wonderful Rachel Blevins and the equally wonderful Shadia Edwards-Dashti, my London colleague, coming up. in the next one.
Radio Sputnik News.
The FBI has released a newly declassified document detailing support given to the Saudi hijackers in the lead-up to the 9/11 terrorist attacks. Released on the 20th anniversary of the attacks, it details contact the hijackers had with Saudi associates in the United States, but does not provide proof senior Saudi government officials were complicit in the plot. The 16-page document is the first to be disclosed since President Joe Biden ordered a declassification review of materials. Bereaved families have long sought the information in hopes of implicating the Saudi government, with many coming out against Biden's involvement in the 9/11 memorial events if the documents remain classified. A long-running lawsuit in federal court in New York aims to hold the Saudi government accountable and alleges Saudi officials provided significant support to some of the hijackers before the attacks. Britain's Health Secretary Sajid Javid has said he wants to remove the PCR test requirement when returning from some foreign countries as soon as, quote, he possibly can, as he confirmed plans for vaccine passports to get into crowded venues had been axed. Javid said he was aware of the cost for families holidaying abroad and that the testing measures should not be in place, quote, for a second longer than is absolutely necessary. He said he had asked officials to remove the PCR rule, quote, at the moment we can. He confirmed that the vaccine proposal will not be going ahead after significant revolt by Tory backbenchers. Plans to raise national insurance to fund health and social care could lead to the breakdown of struggling families, the UK's tax authority says. Ministers announced the tax hike last week to pay for an £86,000 personal cap on lifetime social care costs in England and tackle NHS backlogs. However, the HMRC analysis has predicted it will have a significant impact on wages, inflation and company profits. Labour Shadow Health Secretary Jonathan Ashworth called the proposals a punishing unfair tax rise on working people. The 1.25 percentage point rise in national insurance, a tax paid by workers and employers, will begin next April before becoming a separate health and social care levy from April 2023. It's expected to raise £12 billion a year for the next 3 years. Rohullah Azizi, the brother of Afghanistan's former vice president, has been shot dead by the Taliban, his nephew has said. Azizi, the brother of Amarullah Saleh, was travelling in the northern Panjshir province when his car was stopped by Taliban fighters at checkpoint. Saleh led forces resisting the Taliban in Panjshir, which was the last hideout province in Afghanistan to be overrun by Taliban fighters. His nephew said it was unclear where Azizi was headed when the Taliban stopped him. He added phones were not working in the area. Videos shared online allegedly show the Taliban opening fire on anti-Taliban fighters in Panjshir. Afghan universities will be segregated by gender and a new Islamic dress code will be introduced, the Taliban said today. Higher Education Minister Abdul Baqi Haqqani indicated women would not be allowed to study alongside men. He also announced a review of subjects taught. Women and girls are banned from schools and universities under Taliban rule between 1996 and 2001. The new policy marks a significant change from the accepted practice before the Taliban takeover. Universities were co-educational, with men and women studying side by side, and female students did not have to abide by a dress code. The announcement of the higher education policy comes a day after the Taliban raised their flag over the presidential palace, signalling the beginning of their administration. 2 more towns have been evacuated and soldiers are being deployed as a wildfire continues to burn in Spain's Costa del Sol. The battle is being made more difficult by complicated terrain and the virulent behaviour of the fire, officials said. The blaze in a mountainous area above the resort of Estepona, popular with British tourists, has killed 1 emergency worker since it started on Wednesday. Fanned by strong winds and high late summer temperatures, it appears to have been started deliberately, Regional Environmental Chief Carmen Crespo said. And finally, Emma Raducanu, the 18-year-old tennis player and the first British woman in 44 years to win the US Open, won't be celebrating in champagne after she landed the $2 million check. But she will be binging on chocolate, she said. Clutching at the trophy in numerous photo cells, she said she does not want to let go of it after her fairy tale in New York, culminating in the ultimate happy ending. Raducanu was the first qualifier to win a Grand Slam singles title and the first not to drop a set. Quote, "It means everything to hold this trophy, and I don't want to let go of it right now," she told her former British #1 Tin Henman. Raducanu came through 10 matches to win the title, including 3 qualifying rounds, and beat Olympic champion Belinda Bencic and in-form Maria Sakkari in the quarter and semi-finals respectively. Quote, "For me, I don't feel absolutely any pressure," she said. "I'm still only 18 and I'm just having a free swing at anything that comes my way." And that's the latest here on Sputnik News. I'm Jamie Lowe.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
Will Trump run? That's the second poll. A, yes. B, no. C, be the kingmaker. Will Trump run? Get voting now on my YouTube, on my Telegram, on my Twitter account. It's a good first question to the one and only Rachel Blevins, but I'm going to ask her something else first. To say I'm not a tennis fan would be an understatement. In fact, although I briefly as a schoolboy showed some skill with a tennis racket, I used to turn up at the courts dressed like Alf Tupper, the tough of the track, with fish and chips and paper by the side of the court. I was in all the colors of the rainbow. I didn't have white sand shoes. I didn't have white shorts, I didn't have a white towel. So I was kind of persona non grata. And I never recovered from the shunning I got from the tennis establishment. In Britain, at least, it tends to be a very middle-class sport. But I, along with, I'm certain, the entire British people was jumping with joy at the victory of the rank outsider, Emma Raducanu, from Britain, a young girl, a teenager, from Britain, who had to qualify for the US Open and became an overnight international, worldwide phenomenon. At least I hope that's how they see it in the United States. Let me ask Rachel Blevins if that is true. Rachel, apologies for coming over to New York and winning your Open Tennis Championship. How have the American people taken it?
I would say congratulations to you and your country on that one. You know, I think that unfortunately it's one of those things that really didn't get a lot of coverage, except more so in the sports world this week, because it has been really a crazy week over here in terms of coverage. And we've had a lot of everything related to the 9/11 anniversary that has dominated really our media coverage. And so unfortunately, while she did have an incredible feat, I don't think she got quite the day in the sun in the United States, although I'm sure she got a lot more coverage in the UK than she
for sure
did
and
here.
At 18 she's going to be with us for a long time, I hope. Let's go to 9/11. I saw some of the US coverage. I saw a lot of the British coverage until I had to switch it off, because of course only a person made of stone would not be moved by the recalling of these horrific events, this foul act of mass murder. Killed thousands of people and intended to kill thousands more. The more, the better, from the point of view of these murderers. It's impossible for me to look at George W. Bush and see him be rehabilitated in front of my eyes, hear people describe him as a unifying figure, all because he's not Donald Trump. It's very, very difficult to stomach, Rach.
Oh, absolutely. And the fact that he was even allowed to speak yesterday at all, and the fact that anyone was paying attention to what he was saying, I think is a travesty in and of itself, because it shows that in 20 years, we have somehow forgotten all of the horrific crimes that his administration committed. I mean, 20 years, and yet the United States is still dealing with the actions today. We're still in Iraq. We're trying to get out of Afghanistan, it seems, in some ways. But, you know, when you look at the Bush administration's legacy, it is insane to think that anyone would stand up and listen to him and refer to him as any kind of unifier. And the speech that he gave was even more so troubling, because he was sitting there lecturing the public on not just paying attention to extremists abroad, but also paying attention to extremists here at home. And that's been a really troubling shift that, you know, a lot of people have been worried about, especially over the last year, especially looking at a lot of the political division, is that the United States is done looking at terrorists abroad and trying to stoke fear over what they may do. And instead, they're looking at the possibility of terrorists here at home. And, you know, when we think about what Bush has done and we think about the reception of it, I mean, it is just crazy to see him along with the Obamas, the Bidens, the Clintons attending this 9/11 memorial, and people talking about how great they were, how they were heroes, as if it wasn't these politicians, these war criminals that have led us into the very position that we're in today. And, you know, of course, because it was the 20th anniversary, you had a number of documentaries that came out, and there was one that I was watching that specifically interviewed Bush. It interviewed Condoleezza Rice, Dick Cheney, some of these top members of his administration. And it was bizarre to see that they were sitting there literally chuckling, saying, oh, yeah, on September 11th, on that morning, you know, we had no idea what was going to happen. We didn't know, you know, we were totally unprepared for this or for anything like it. I mean, it makes the United States look just laughable when you have an administration that acts like that. And 20 years later, that's suddenly their take on it.
Yeah, and being lionized, you know, they should be in jail. George Bush and Tony Blair should be in prison. But instead, on primetime on the BBC, and it must have been true in the US, they're lecturing us all. As if, you know, they committed none of the Guantanamo, Abu Ghraib, extraordinary rendition, torturing prisoners, killing 1 million people in Iraq, spawning ISIS, and so on, as if none of that happened. Now it's cuddly George Bush.
Oh, yeah, everyone wants to talk about how he's the old grandfather who is now a painter, and that's kind of the light that they've put him in, not talking about the fact that there are thousands of family members who are fighting for some kind of truth, who are fighting for the United States government to be honest about what it knew, when it knew it. And on top of that, I mean, I know that there's been a lot of talk about the FBI's investigation into 9/11, whether those documents are ever going to be fully released. Biden kind of did a mini release where he, you know, released 16 pages that were, of course, very heavily redacted. And you think about those thousands of family members who went through this horrible atrocity, and then they have to sit there and they have to watch these politicians who have lied to them, who have campaigned on the promise that they are going to fully release those documents, that they are going to make the truth known. And yet they get into office, they don't do it. Biden, you know, did the bare minimum, really, of what he could do. And those family members have to sit there and they have to watch the media parading these politicians around. I mean, it's a slap in the face all over again 20 years later.
Yeah, exactly. It was Hamlet without the prince, wasn't it? New York City. He was like a ghost. He wasn't there, but he was there. In fact, it turned out he was being photographed with hundreds of firefighters. That was a cute move, in my opinion. I wouldn't want to have been in the shot with Clinton, Bush, and Obama. I'd rather have been in a shot with firefighters. It was quite a clever move, and if you saw him at the sports event and saw how the people reacted to him, he's definitely not finished, Rachel.
Oh, I would agree. And I think it was, sort of the perfect day for Donald Trump, if you want to call it that. He started out meeting with first responders. And these are really, you're talking about the blue collar workers. These are the people who helped get him into office in the first place. And so these are going to be the first people he goes to tell them how proud he is of them, how thankful he is for their service, to take photos, to, go through that whole rigmarole. And it's interesting that he did that, especially at a time where you have all the other past presidents that are over here at their memorial. And then you've got Trump over here doing his own thing, sort of making his own pathway. He doesn't want to be seen with the rest of them. It was a very smart, public relations move on his part. And then, of course, he hops on a private jet and goes down to Florida to be a commentator for a boxing match. Now, that was seen as an absolutely bizarre move. But of course, it's Donald Trump. He's going to make it work. And on top of that, he's got people in the crowd with signs that say, bring back 45 and Trump won. And these are his people. And so it's interesting that we're still waiting for that actual announcement that he's going to run again in 2024. But we got just enough of him to see that he's not going anywhere anytime soon.
Lastly, Rachel, although it's obviously a bigger story here than over there, I wondered if people were looking forward eagerly to Prince Andrew, or at least his lawyers, appearing in court tomorrow, or whether they, like our viewers and listeners, think there's not an earthly chance of Prince Andrew facing the music.
Yeah, I think it's going to be, it may be a while before we see Prince Andrew actually appearing in court here in New York City himself. And it's interesting to see that this is one of those stories where we've really watched, credit to Virginia Giuffre, who has worked tirelessly to fight for some sort of accountability for just a few of Jeffrey Epstein's contacts. We look at Jeffrey Epstein and the fact that the majority of the people who are in his inner circle have been able to walk free. We don't even talk about them anymore. We don't address them. We don't wonder where they've gone up to. And yet it's people like Ghislaine Maxwell, who, they say is still behind bars, that's still working on her case. And when it comes to Prince Andrew, the fact that his lawyers responded and said, oh, well, they didn't serve the papers to us correctly. That was laughable, but also completely ridiculous. And it shows you that his team is not worried whatsoever about the possibility of him actually having to get into court, actually having to testify, and actually having to show whether or not he can sweat, because that is going to be the first thing that happens if that day does come for Prince Andrew. But until then, it feels like the rallying cry to continue to call for accountability for Jeffrey Epstein's associates, it has gotten so minimalized, but it's still there in some cases.
Now, it's said that he can't sweat, or he said that he couldn't sweat, but it was revealed today in the newspapers that he's a big fan of Finnish saunas with a bit of birching afterwards. That would be a very odd recreation if you sat in a sauna but couldn't sweat, don't you think?
I would say so. I think he's kind of gotten himself into that hole on that one. Who makes a comment like that? Who for that to be your defense? That's something else. I think I'm almost curious. I would love to see the man testify and curious to see what else comes out of his mouth. But at the end of the day, you just hope that maybe one of these days, the women who were abused by Jeffrey Epstein and his associates, who were taken advantage of, who had their lives completely ruined by these people, that one of these days they will also get their day in court.
Well said. Thank you very much indeed, Rachel Blevins, our US correspondent. Let's go to the phone lines. Darren is in Southend. Go ahead, Darren.
George, how you doing? Lovely.
All right, sir. Nice to talk to you.
Yeah, I've been watching you for years, George. What attracted me to you was that the press, the bit of press that was towards you. And I don't like the big guys. I fight for the small guys. Now, I've always been inspired by you, George, with your opinions. It's always been truthful, and I love your opinion. What I was going to ask you, George, was I was curious as to the last few weeks you've been insulting Biden. Now, I know Joe Biden has got his history and stuff like that. I'm not going into that. As a matter of fact, there ain't a politician out there, as far as I know, that hasn't got a bad history. But you've not mentioned Trump. You've just reported on Trump on the last few weeks. Now, I've noticed that the opinion on Joe Biden has been rather personal from yourself, and the opinion on Trump has just been reporting. Now, I'm aware that Russia Today was like, this is a Russian-based program, so Trump was good for Russia, which based on my understanding, things worked out there. So I don't want to head into the area of it being propaganda. But I want you to know that I do understand Joe Biden. There's nobody in America at the moment that I could say who's a good guy, and pretty much the UK as well. Well,
I agree with you on that, but I have to set the record straight. Far from Donald Trump being good for Russia, he was catastrophic for Russia. The fake Russiagate coup attempt to overthrow him, to invalidate his presidency on the grounds that he was a Russian agent or asset, was so dangerous to Donald Trump that he became the most anti-Russian president in modern American political history. We could go through the cancellation of the INF, the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, the Open Skies Treaty, the withdrawal from the Iran nuclear deal on which Russia had invested so much, the sanctions against Russian diplomats, the closure of the consulate in San Francisco. I could go on, but time is running. So it's simply, I'll let you back in, it's simply not the case that Trump was good for Russia, and therefore, by implication, that I might be saying what I'm saying about Trump because this is Russia Today. First of all, I would never do that. Secondly, Russia Today, RT, would never ask me to do that. And in a decade working with them, they have never, ever asked me to say or not say anything. So what I'm doing, Darren, is giving you my honest opinion. And my honest opinion is this, that Joe Biden is a grasping, thieving, murdering crook and a liar to the nth degree. Now, Donald Trump is a completely separate thing, and I'm going to tell you what I think of him also. But it's not either or, Darren. If you despise Joe Biden, that doesn't mean you love Donald Trump. You have to shake yourself out of this binary thinking. I have followed Joe Biden's career for 49 years. 49 years I've followed Joe Biden being a mouthpiece for every war, every torture camp, every crime committed by the US empire has had Joe Biden as one of its mouthpieces. I despise him. And I think that it's highly dangerous for the world that the United States has as its president, with his finger on the nuclear trigger, a man that you wouldn't send out to buy a loaf. That's dangerous. Now, you call that personal. It's not personal. It's what I'm observing with my own eyes and hearing with my own ears. He's a danger to the peace and security of the world. And he murdered 10 children just last week and told us that the father and his children were ISIS Khorasan suicide bombers. It was another lie. It was another murder. Darren, last word to you.
George, I fully agree with you, and I'm totally with you. I did think the Iran deal to pull out there was was Trump's personal thing. Also, that when Trump did win, I believe that war was on the verge with the Democrats, the way they was with Obama and stuff like that, and
That's
Trump
a fair point.
in.
That's a fair point.
Trump getting in made it a little bit more easier, and
That's
now
a fair
wars.
point. That's a good point. Good point. And when Trump runs, as I believe he will, trust me, you'll hear the full blast of what I think about Donald Trump. But what I am doing, Darren, I'm trying to explain to the audience why Trump, after all that trouble, why Trump is in with an outstanding chance of being re-elected. If we don't want to understand why, then we're foolish indeed. Darren, thanks for the call. Chris is in Canada, in Calgary, on the same subject. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, wow, just listening to what you just said, it's like I said 5 years ago, I'll just substitute Hillary for Joe. The good news is that Trump lost. The bad news is that Joe won.
Very good.
Well,
very good.
Yeah, I've called a couple of times about 9/11. If you really want to get closer to the truth, maybe you could get Dr. Judy Wood on your show. She's written, she's a PhD in all sorts of related science disciplines, engineering and mechanical, such and so forth. And I spent an hour and a half today watching her, a lecture of hers. I've got another hour to go get through, but she's written something called Where Did the Towers Go? Now, thoughts on Trump. I think, given what he inspired on the 6th of January, by the way, that was an inside job, because we all know who the Mr. Big was, Mr. Big Liar, the head inside man. Have you caught the actual audio where those people are charging into the Capitol yelling, "Hang the Vice President"? Did you get the audio?
Yeah, I'm sure I did. But I've been at rougher football matches than what you're calling an insurrection on the 6th of January. Got to tell you that, Chris. I've been in more troublesome situations standing in Downing Street.
Yeah, the audio goes, "Who let the dogs in? Trump, Trump, Trump."
Okay, thanks for that, Chris. People are always determined to sing on my show. I was on a South African radio show yesterday with my good friend Abby, and I was rather surprised when he opened the show, and his first question was, did I remember him and I singing Strangers in the Night with all the dogs barking in Durban? I did remember it, but then he started singing it and asked me to sing along on a Muslim radio station in Durban in South Africa. And I did, although I have no idea what the audience thought about it. Will Trump run, by the way? Yes, 78% of you. No, 16%. Kingmaker, instead, 6%. You better get your vote in because it closes at 10 o'clock. Last question of the night then. In 1969, the British government announced a limited military operation involving British troops. Aren't they all? Where were they sent? 1969. A, Cyprus. B, Malaya. C, Northern Ireland. Answer after the break.
Radio Sputnik.
You know, and it's a very, thank you for, you know, I'm a big fan of your show, Gigi. Great debate, great. And I'm Scottish. I'm very passionate about what's happening there, you know. I had a great mom. She was Scottish, Mary McLeod. She taught me well. She taught me well at everything, including golf. I love Scotland, and I love the Scottish food. It's great food. I said to Melania, you know, haggis. Look at that. What's more Scottish than that? Me. I am that haggis. She said, what, thin-skinned and full of crap?
Sputnik has been launched to give you a closer look at everything happening in the world. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
The mother of all talk shows. Join our faculty of legends, contributors, and callers. Everyone is welcome.
In 1969, the British government announced a limited military operation involving British troops in Northern Ireland. 1969. Still running yet. Now, I've got so much social media, I'm not going to even make a dent in it. But Marek says, I'm about 50-50, to be honest. Trump's no spring chicken. You say that again. He's an old boiler. But at least he's still got his faculties, which is more than can be said for some. Ian Muir says the name Trump will run, but will it be Donald? Very good point, Ian. And Slimanx says probably only case I don't see him running is if Kamala is president come 24. And John Marsh says yes, he'll run to the nearest shelter if there's any trouble. Sean says I hope he runs, even though I wasn't massively impressed by his performance. And Joe says, not the Joe, one thing for sure, he's too egomaniac to be kingmaker unless one of his sons decides to run. What about his daughter? As for the rerun, unless the GOP does something to stop the Trumpism wing, he will definitely run again. And Pat Brannigan says, Hillary Clinton is an evil stepmother type. Oh, well, we better not tread on these eggshells because I'm joined by my good colleague, Shadia Edwards-Dashti, who works at RT UK, but is increasingly power in the broadcasting world across the globe. Shadia, thank you for joining us. I asked Rachel if Emma Raducanu had made it big in the US media, and it turns out actually rather not, because they had so many other things competing for space in the media, 9/11 and all. It has been an extraordinary explosion of interest in this 18-year-old girl here in Britain, hasn't it? Have you followed that?
Absolutely. As a woman in sport myself, it's so amazing to see her do so well. Of course, just a few weeks ago, she stumbled a little bit, but she came back so fighting, so strong. And it's just amazing to see a woman do so well, but not just a woman, but a young woman at that, taking on the media by storm, but taking on not just the nation here in the UK, but globally. It really was, I think a lot of people in the UK were just hoping and praying she would do it, because it really represents and symbolizes something much bigger than I'm sure she could probably appreciate right now. But it's just incredible to see.
The mental strength was astounding. As you say, she disappointed at Wimbledon. She had to qualify for the US Open. And she didn't drop one set. How's that for remorseless focus?
I think, in some ways, maybe her age actually played for her, with her, rather than against her in this sort of space, because maybe she didn't feel all the years of maybe some other professionals in the same sector that have so much pressure on them to live up to reputations and so on. And sometimes it's better just to be like, whatever, I'll give it my best shot. And if it's not good enough, then fine. And if it is, well, as it is, and it has been, it really, really paid off for her. But yeah, there was a lot of pressure on her. But in some ways, because she was a bit younger than majority of whom have done so well, it might have just made her think.
She had nothing
back of her mind and focus.
Nothing to lose. Yeah, you're a footballer.
Exactly.
You're a footballer, aren't you?
Yeah, I would like to put myself out there as a footballer. I play in Sunday League, so it's not very high up there. But of course, we keep it as competitive as if it was the World Cup every single Sunday.
Yeah, of course. I play my small children as if it's the World Cup. It's very cruel. It's very cruel. I bowl them out of the way in order to battle down on...
George, you cannot get onto the pitch. Stay on the sideline.
Exactly. As a footballer, you must have been impressed by Cristiano's return.
Yeah, I mean, if he didn't go back to Man U, oh my goodness, there would have been absolute tears. But it's great again for Britain to see his return. I think so many football fans, it doesn't really matter what football team you support in the UK. Everyone's just like, the king is home.
Exactly. Now look, the king is home, but the prince is hiding behind his mother's skirts. It's an unedifying spectacle, Shadia, isn't it? A man of 61 hiding behind his 94-year-old mother, trying to avoid the bailiffs tendering legal papers on him.
Look, I think this really speaks about the monarchy in general, really, and talks about privilege, the heart of what privilege really means in this society. Also, capitalism. At the end of the day, it really does feel like money is total power, especially here in the United Kingdom. And it feels like you can do no wrong, commit the worst kind of crimes, and just hide behind that pillar of the state almost.
Yeah, but she's got poor Queen Elizabeth. She's got all these sons embarrassing her to one degree or another. But Prince Andrews is of in a way, a different order, isn't it? He's evading justice in a serious criminal case of alleged sexual assault. Why is the British media not up in arms against him? They kick lumps out of Prince Harry for far lesser offences than is alleged against Prince Andrew.
Yeah, absolutely. We're seeing this time and time again. And with Prince Andrew, it's completely shocking that the media is allowing him to get away with it. It's almost like, let's just turn it to the back of our newspaper. Let's not really dig into this and really hold the powers that be accountable. That, as you say, Prince Harry is vilified by the media, and he is almost seen as a scapegoat for the rest of the monarchy and the royal family. But really, when we look at the face of it, look at what Prince Andrew is doing. He should be in jail right now.
Well, anybody else would be they'd be on remand anyway. Poor Julian Assange has been on remand for years, and he's not facing the allegation that Prince Andrew is. Boris Johnson, there was some thought that there'd be a reshuffle in Downing Street tonight. Doesn't appear to have materialised, but quite a few of the British ministers' jackets are hanging on a shaky nail, don't you think?
Oh, totally. Not just on a shaky nail, but really on the floor right now. To be quite frank, a cabinet reshuffle should have happened a long time ago. But then again, when you talk about a cabinet reshuffle, you have to think, well, who on earth from the Tory party would replace the cabinet? We are looking at a really weak Tory government, not just in terms of who's in the cabinet, but also Tory backbenchers as well, because they're not really pointing the fingers of blame or the Tory party in check at all. So we look at these big dogs in the Tory party. We look at Matt Hancock, look how he's fallen. Sajid Javid, a terrible replacement. Priti Patel, absolutely awful. We have so many ministers. Dominic Raab, who's at the forefront of all of these controversies as of late. This is beyond a tiny cabinet reshuffle that we might need to see, but actually at the crux of it, I would say a total shake-up, not just a little tiny reshuffle, but a total shake-up of who is governing the United Kingdom.
And yet, if they were to fall tomorrow, the opposition front bench is as bereft of talent and ideas and any kind of plan for taking Britain out of the multiple crises that we are in. I've not known a time, and I've been around a long time, when the two front benches between them could barely muster a statesman or a stateswoman between them. How did it get to this, Shadia?
how depressing is this, George, that neither the Tory party or the Labour Party, the opposition, can't even oppose? This has got to a really, really tragic state. And I think, the first glimmer of hope for the left was Jeremy Corbyn. And obviously in 2019, in the general election, it went so terribly wrong. People weren't getting behind him. I think that's where this sad story, this sad chapter really does begin. The huge loss in the 2019 general election for the left, really, and it has just got worse and worse since then. Yes, the Tory party are now working with a stronger majority than before, 80 seats, that's fine. That still doesn't mean the opposition can't oppose, but what we're seeing is Keir Starmer, he doesn't mutter a word on anything. Even the pandemic, which arguably wasn't a political situation, but that doesn't mean you can't hold the government to account of how they're handling a health crisis. You can still put political points against the government, and he simply couldn't do that. So if the opposition can't even oppose on a health grounds, how on earth is he supposed to oppose on a political grounds? And we're really getting to that sad, tragic state where the Tory party, they won all of these red wall seats. They turned from red to blue based on huge fundamental lies by the Tory party. But it was simply Keir Starmer's just not able to win anything back because he's just so weak.
This is the anniversary of Jeremy Corbyn becoming Labour leader. And of course, despite the tidal wave of attacks, propaganda against him, he came within 3,000 votes of becoming Prime Minister in 2017 and then crashed to defeat in 2019, in part because he was forced to adopt a policy on Brexit which was guaranteed to lose all these red wall seats that you referred to. What is the future for Jeremy Corbyn if he isn't readmitted into the Labour Party? What's the point of him continuing to be a member of it?
Well, just to say, on the Brexit, when you're referring to Brexit there, particularly in the general election, obviously, the general election of 2019 definitely turned into another referendum of sorts. And we did see that in very various ways, with many seats turning to blue because they were more supportive of Brexit in certain areas up and down the United Kingdom. As for Jeremy Corbyn, I think he was really pushed and pulled, tugged in so many different directions because majority of the Labour Party are centralists. They're not really left-wing activists at all. So I feel like he was being pulled in many different directions, which in some ways probably didn't go to his credit or benefit in many ways. But in terms of where Jeremy Corbyn sits now, I personally think it's absolutely atrocious how Keir Starmer has treated him, considering that Keir Starmer was supporting him when they were trying to get the general election, campaigning for the general election in 2019. Completely backstabbed by Keir Starmer, but quite frankly, Corbyn is now free from the shoulder blades of Keir Starmer, who's pressing his hands down onto Jeremy Corbyn and many other politicians. He's now free from that burden and free from the wrath of Keir Starmer, that quite frankly, he can now go about and campaign exactly how he used to without having to conform or abide by any rules. And at the end of the day, we both know Tony Benn so well, and he said he left Parliament to get more political. Yes, exactly. Thank you, Shadia, very much indeed for your debut on the mother of all talk shows. Most interesting. Thank you. Lovely to see you. Thank you. And good luck in the football. I'll be looking out for your result. Thanks, Shadia. Will Trump run? Yes, 77%. No, 16%. Kingmaker, 7%. That's gone up one. Let's go to Canada. Again, Federico is on the line. Always a pleasure. Federico, welcome.
Always a pleasure. Thank you very much, George.
Thanks.
I have another option maybe for the next presidential run in the United States, Tulsi Gabbard, maybe. She can do something good for the nation. It's going to be difficult.
Well, there's a lot of good people, but she's one of the people that would be good, but she just doesn't have the support. She couldn't raise the money, and she wouldn't get the nomination.
That's true. Okay, George, I wanted to speak a little bit about towers. I am a journeyman welder. I am qualified on steel. I can build the Golden Gate. I work with steel that is more than 5/8 inches thick, and I know what they can support or stand for. I'm not an engineer. I'm just a welder. But I totally agree with the
Never
guys
say that. Some of my best friends are welders. Go ahead, Federico.
Yes, but I do agree with the engineers that talked to you before, George, and the sense that it's impossible, literally, through physics, through the laws of physics, that the three towers just came down the way they did. And there's a hypothesis that I would like you to consider. If, to me, the laws of physics are exponentially proof that was totally planned. How come Dick Cheney, how come George Bush in 20 years didn't have any answers about what happened in this case when the laws of physics proves?
Well, they're definitely hiding something, probably a lot of things, Federico. But again, I'm back to my two questions. If you are going to fly airplanes into these buildings, why would you need to take the utterly potentially terminal risk of seeding this building with explosives and bring it down when you were going to fly airplanes into it anyway?
It wouldn't be the first time they try and accomplish something like that. You know the power that the Pentagon have on the media. Investigative journalism, as Max Blumenthal made a program yesterday about these issues. And
I'll look out for that. I'm a big admirer of Max.
Sure, but they not only mention that, they can get away with it because they control the media. And if you see the documentary, which is a movie actually.
Well, they don't control this media. They're not controlling our conversation now. And there's a million people. There's a million people around the world listening and watching to this show every week. So controlling the media, they don't control RT.
Just consider the hypothesis that this was planned with complicity of high spheres in the United States. I think you cannot just reject that hypothesis.
I never reject any hypothesis.
But just consider that hypothesis, George, because it's very probable. They have done it before with the Gulf of Tonkin. They have get away with a lot of financial issues.
But they
profited with the war. They profited with the war in Iraq.
No, but you're not answering my fundamental point. Why do both? Why not either blow up the towers or hijack airplanes and fly them into the towers? Why do both? Why do both?
George, democracy doesn't exist, not even in England.
That's not what I'm asking you. I'm asking you, a welder, I'm asking you, why do both? That's nothing to do with controlling the media. It's nothing to do with democracy not existing. Why do both, Federico?
Okay, nobody can literally disagree with the mainstream media, and you saw that the years after. Now we can speak, but in the years after the events, nobody was.
I'm asking. Look, last time, third time.
The 9/11 Commission.
Third time.
The 9/11 Commission was a
all right. Enough. Chris in Colchester. Let's hear from him. Chris, welcome.
Hi, George.
Hi.
Yeah, I can answer that question. But first, I'd just like to say I'd like to offer my support to Neil in Essex. I know he's the same county as me, and that was very upsetting to hear.
It was very, very moving, yeah.
But you're welcome to give him my number if he needs any help, because that was distressing to hear. And, you know, I'm always support an anti-war, anyone that's in that situation.
Yeah,
so,
I'll do that. I'll do that. It's very kind of you, Chris. He's probably listening and watching still. Yeah.
Hopefully. Well, with regards to 9/11, the thing is that on the day there was reports of explosions in the base of both buildings, but everyone focused on Building 7, and how fast the buildings fall. I mean, if someone burned my house down and I saw someone screeching off in a van, I wouldn't be focusing on how fast my house was falling down. I would want to know who did it. And like you laid out earlier, Saudi Arabia, there's a direct link to Saudi Arabia.
Direct.
And that wasn't the only help they got. I mean,
and why have we had to wait 20 years to get that news, Chris?
Well, because of these kooks that keep talking about how fast the building fell and thermite and all this garbage that is put out intentionally as a red herring. I mean, there's and again, look at back to the '93 bombing where they tried to blow up the trade tower, but it was botched because they parked the truck in the wrong place. But exactly the same thing happened. If you look, there's reports of explosives in the base of the building. It wasn't wired with blimmin' thermite and everything. There was explosives in the base and people were arrested. People need to look into that. But we need to look at the anthrax, because that's one of the most important things. That is what linked Iraq to Al-Qaeda, this fake meeting in Prague.
That came from Fort Detrick, from an American.
Yeah, Bruce Ivans, who killed himself apparently. But the meeting in Prague between Iraqi officials and lead hijacker Mohammed Atta, that was the witness by Israeli security forces apparently, but it never took place.
Made the front page of the Sunday Times. I remember it as if it was yesterday.
Yeah, and that's what we need to look into. Where did this anthrax come from? These letters sent death to America, death to Israel. So that you need to get Ryan Dawson on. I'm sorry, you need. There'll be smears about him, but we need to forget about people like Richard Gage, who got on Loose Change, this stupid documentary that was on even Netflix. I mean, and people cite this like a missile hit the Pentagon. Where did this missile? It was a plane that was. It is such an insult to the people who died on 9/11. It was a plane. People died in the plane. A plane flew into the Pentagon. The wreckage was there. The traces of DNA of the human beings that died were in the Pentagon. People died in the Pentagon. And these idiots keep on going about missiles and holograms and stuff. It's ridiculous. This is what puts people off at 9/11.
Chris, a wonderful, wonderful call. Thanks for it. Caroline is in Glasgow. Let's hear from her. Caroline.
Good evening, George.
Good evening.
I want to speak to you about the 5 dancing Israelis. But before I speak about it, I want to tell you, many years ago when you won Highland, my mother, being Irish, took me to see you, and I asked her what the word was that they called you. And I said, does that mean that I'm like you, Mum, or is he like you? You know what word it was the posh lady called you?
The F word.
Yeah, the
Fenian.
F word. The Fenian word. And I asked her, and she said, no, a Fenian is a Celtic warrior, Caroline, like your great-grandfather was in 1916. And she explained it to me. I was very young. Anyway, I can't understand why there was 5 dancing Israelis.
But was there really, Caroline?
The lady took the van number down. She gave it to her husband when they came in. When he came in from his work, it was a white van. They were high-fiving themselves, lighting a cigarette as though they were at a pop concert. That's what the American lady said. They stopped them on the George Washington Bridge. They were found with explosives, and some of them were Mossad agents. Now, George...
No, let me stop you, Caroline, because if they were stopped with explosives and they were, some of them, Mossad agents, we wouldn't have to be having this conversation now, because that would be QED. They were not found with explosives, and they were not Mossad agents. It is alleged that they were Israelis dancing with joy on a van at the destruction by bin Laden and his extremist, murderous gang. And there would be a logical, rational reason for Israelis to be happy about that, because it would begin a process that would end in the destruction of Iraq and all the other Arab and Muslim countries that have been destroyed by the United States ever since 9/11. So again, we have to be careful not to ascribe to newspaper articles and allegations things that are not actually factual evidence. And by the process of Chinese whispers, somebody hears a statement which is false or only half true, and before you know it, it is said around the world that that thing is true. Now, it is the diamond wedding anniversary, the 60th wedding anniversary, 60 years, the legend, Norma in Bristol. Congratulations, Norma. And George.
Oh, George. Oh, no, Roger's my husband.
Yeah, I know.
Roger.
They're just, what they're doing is pulling my leg here. They've put up Norma and George in Bristol. Roger, I knew that. Yeah. Happy anniversary to both of you. Go ahead.
Yeah, that was ever so kind of you, and all my Twitter friends as well, because they all gave good wishes, and, you know...
Well, it's not, I mean, not everybody makes it to 60 years married.
Oh, I know.
Can you still remember your wedding day with clarity?
Yes. I had the book out, and all my grandchildren and sons were looking at the pictures, you know, because they brought cakes and that. Anyway, George.
How wonderful.
I did want to say, Shadia Edwards, she made the sports points that I was going to make, which was okay. But Ronaldo, I think, well, very, very good, great thrills. But Emma Raducanu, I mean, she and the other girl, Leila Fernandez, they played a fantastic game.
Yeah, both of them were great. Both of them are teenagers.
They were, yeah. She was good too, that Leila Fernandez. But I mean, Emma Raducanu made history. And there is a bit of snobbery around tennis. I actually played it till I was 67, George.
What?
Yeah, I did. I played. I loved it. But it is very middle class. I know that. But people, if they enjoy, whether it's football, snooker,
you see,
tennis...
the more successful our people are in these games, the more people come into them, and the less snobbish and exclusive they become. So if all the girls in the land inspired by Emma, if a decent number of them take up tennis, it will begin to change the character, the nature of the tennis establishment. I felt humiliated when I was at the tennis. I was only,
I know what you mean.
16.
I know what you...
I was only 16, and I knew they were looking down their noses at me because I didn't have the right gear, Norma.
Yeah, there is, George, because I actually joined the club just before I went for some tennis coaching and stuff away, but I did join a retired people's club the last 2 years, and they weren't very nice. They were all sticking together, and they weren't very friendly. But I just like playing tennis, and I wasn't that bad either.
It is well, I wasn't that bad either. It is a wonderful game, and it would be terrific if more people took it up. Yeah. Last point, Norma.
Yeah. Well, you know about these Pfizer vaccinations?
Yeah.
You were saying about. Well, I've had the two, and I've got a signed card, which is given to me, was given at the time of the injection.
Oh, I didn't get that.
To record that I've got this little card, and I carry it around, and then it's easy, anybody can see that I've had them. I wondered if they give it out generally to people.
Well, they certainly ought to. It's been marvellous, Norma, and I wish you and Roger a very happy 60th wedding anniversary. Both of you are diamond geezers, so far as I am concerned. And it's been marvellous for me. I hope it was for you, and if it was, come back next week at the same time same place. Bring another viewer or listener with you.